The January 19th, 2021 regular meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board will come to order at 5:01 p.m. All rise. President Beckman, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board will move to a roll call, starting from the chair's right.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hartwells.
Patty Beckman.
Julie, can you hear us?
Probably not.
Board Member Sanowski, can you hear us? Board Member Sanowski?
Yes.
Good. Board Member Sanowski is present, and Jan Michael Greenberg. All board members are present, and there is a quorum. The board will move to the approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda as presented? Board Member Hartwells.
I'd like to remove item L from the consent agenda.
Item 8L.
Item 8L.
Are there any further amendments to the agenda as presented? Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Board Member Beckman moves. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the agenda as amended. Is there any debate? All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion passes 5-0. We will now move to agenda item 3. As a reminder, if you wish to make a public comment at tonight's board meeting, please fill out one of the blue or white cards at the entrance to the board meeting room and present it to our board secretary, Ms. Wagner. The board will now move to student and staff recognitions. Dr. Menzel.
Good afternoon, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and governing board members. On this day that follows our district, state, and national holidays celebrating the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we would like you to meet 2 students who recognize his inspiration and members of their families. I'd like to have Dr. Sakos, our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, come forward and introduce the students to us. Dr. Sakos.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. Good afternoon, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, and Ms. Wagner. We would like to introduce you to 2 8th grade students at Ingleside Middle School, Luke Alvarado and Savannah Shorb. Luke, would you like to join me at the podium? And Savannah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Savannah.
Hi.
Hi. There she is. Welcome. Anyways, they came forward. For 36 years, celebrating the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has been a part of the culture at Arizona State University. The celebrations have had to look a little bit different this year, but even with their being virtual, they've been very impactful. Part of ASU's celebrations are essay and poster contests for K-12 students. This year's theme centered around the need to respect everyone, regardless of differences in race, ability, gender, or age, for example. Luke decided to write about his father, who is here with us in the audience today. Mr. Alvarado, welcome. Luke, would you like to share your 3rd place winning essay with us now?
Yeah. A person in my life that is a leader to me is my dad, because of what he does to help out the community, such as buying computers for children in need that don't have computers, and helping them to be able to get one. My dad helps out the community by raising money to give computers to the children that don't have one for school. He has been on the news talking about his program and what it does and how it helps people that don't have computers. This program can provide the children that need it for education. The children that this can help is children in need for online education and help them get computers. It can help the community by providing for the ones in need for education, because there are some children out there that are not able to afford computers, which is why my dad is helping them so they can learn, which the program my dad is doing helps these children with these problems. My dad is a great leader because of all the things he does, especially helping these children, which is why he is a leader and an inspiration for me. He always inspires me with telling me to try my best, and I hope to be a leader like him for when I get older and to help out the community and people in need like my dad does.
That is wonderful, Luke, and thank you, Mr. Alvarado. It's certainly very necessary during this recent year of needing such equipment like computers for distance learning for our youth. So thank you. All right, Luke, you can stand nearby just a little bit behind me there because I'm going to be giving you something in just a moment. Okay? I'm going to talk about Savannah a little bit. Savannah Shorb is a student in Mr. Wes Wagner's 8th grade language arts honors class and took 2nd place in the essay. Savannah, please tell us about your respect for your grandfather.
When I think of a leader, I think of someone who is brave, generous, driven, independent, and heroic. Even if you don't value or show these traits, you can still be a leader. When being a leader, you help others and make yourself a figure that is looked up to. My grandfather shows all these characteristics, and that makes him a leader to me. My grandfather was a part of Esperance and Surgical Eye Expeditions. These are both organizations made up of different groups of doctors who volunteer their time to go around the world and give medical care to those in need. They would use donated supplies to do procedures for people who didn't have health insurance or couldn't afford it. Not only did they perform procedures, they taught other doctors how to do some operations. Keep in mind, they did this for free, but the doctors themselves had to pay. Even though it is a volunteer organization, the doctors would have to pay for their own airplane tickets, hotel rooms, and meals. This shows leadership because he wanted to take his experience and expertise into something that helped others. My grandfather inspires me and people all over the world to help the ones in need. His generosity, courageousness, and leadership has helped our community and world become a better place. Just like Martin Luther King Jr., my grandfather showed what it is like to be a leader.
Thank you, Savannah. Congratulations to Luke and Savannah for representing Ingleside and SUSD, representing SUSD in ASU's 2021 MLK celebration. And Ms. Cadera, don't go very far, please. We hope you enjoy the online festivities on Thursday, at which all the student essay and poster contest winners will be recognized. So I'd like Ms. Cadera to join me at the podium. And I do want to mention that Luke's teacher is Mrs. Shirley Stone, and naturally Principal Aaron Cadera, and I would like for you to help me, Ms. Cadera, in giving Luke his challenge coin. You may touch it, and then there's wipes to go along with it. So Luke's coin is there. It's always an honor set to give the challenge coin, and I feel like Ms. Cadera should be the one to do this.
Thank you.
All right, Savannah, you're still with us. Savannah, please accept this challenge coin. Ms. Cadera is going to hold it up so that you can see it, and we're going to get this in the mail to you tomorrow. And congratulations, we're very proud of you.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations to Savannah and Luke, not only on your ASU awards, but also on seeing in your grandfather and father, respectively, how simple acts of thoughtfulness for others and generosity of spirit can have such a far-reaching effect in our communities. Thank you. I would also like to take a moment to recognize the efforts of Scottsdale's Community Celebrating Diversity Organization and Saguaro High School for the excellent virtual celebration they produced last Thursday for the 21st annual SUSD Martin Luther King Jr. Youth Voices event. Students from all 5 of our high schools, 2 of our middle schools, and more than a dozen other schools from around the valley had the opportunity to hear from Ken Wadicki Jr., who is known as the Free Hugs Guy on social media. Students were able to hear how he embodies the spirit of Dr. King in his work around the country and how he works to reach across ideological lines to create new, powerful connections between people who believe they have nothing in common. If you missed seeing the event, you can find a link to it on the SUSD website, and I highly recommend watching it for those who haven't seen it. And that concludes our governing board celebrations this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and congratulations again to Luke and Savannah. The board will now move to agenda item 5, superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel.
Given the length of our agenda, I will try to keep my comments brief this evening. A couple of things of note. First, the Honor Health partnership that we have that will result in nearly 2,000 of our employees being able to take advantage of a vaccination opportunity this coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the first vaccine, and then February 12th, 13th, and 14th for the second dose. It was one of those things that took a lot of time and planning, and I want to give a specific shout out to our partners at Honor Health because it's not an easy thing to do. We have a number of volunteers who are also going to be on site during the days when our Scottsdale Unified School District employees are getting vaccinated. Some people were not able to get vaccines on those 3 days, but they were able to sign up on other dates that Honor Health is offering it. And we're encouraged by the numbers that have signed up and think it's really important on our journey to ensuring that we can continue to provide an educational environment where our staff and students are healthy in navigating the COVID challenges. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about COVID right now because we've got an agenda item talking about the building-based metrics, and I think a lot of those things will come up then. I would like to acknowledge that today we had middle school and high school students return to in-person learning. We're still collecting feedback from the sites in terms of their experience. I've had a number of emails from parents expressing how happy their children were to be in school. I've had some suggestions for improvements from some teachers as a result of their experience today, and I'm looking forward to getting more feedback as the days progress. One of the things that I know people have been watching is what happened with AIA and their decision at first to cancel winter sports and then to reinstate winter sports. And I just wanted to share a document related to that decision and some clarifications that they provided. So winter sports are still permitted to proceed. They wanted to clarify that at events, 2 parents or legal guardians per student athlete are permitted to attend their student's home event only, and that, as always, school districts may be more stringent. But in the fall sports, you were able to attend both home and away events, and that is, at least in many cases, that is not the case for winter sports. And they reiterated the rationale behind requiring face coverings during competition. So as we know, one of the concerns that has been expressed is around potential spread of COVID in athletic contests, and I just wanted to share an update from AIA. And the last piece that has been an ongoing challenge for us, but we've been making some progress, relates to identifying substitute teachers. As you know, during the fall semester, we encountered some challenges in terms of having a sufficient number. And we've had, since our call for more subs, we've had quite a few applications. For those people who have applied for regular sub certification, we've had some delays, not because of Scottsdale Unified School District, but when the paperwork is submitted to the state, sometimes the delay has been related to having an official transcript. There are other people who have applied for emergency sub-certification. I sign those almost on a weekly basis, and I believe those get processed a little bit more quickly. So we are grateful for all the people who have submitted paperwork to become certified substitutes for Scottsdale Unified School District, and we encourage those who might have been considering it but haven't done so yet to fill out the paperwork because we're still seeing a need to be able to have an ample supply of substitutes to ensure that we've got coverage during this environment.
Can you, just really quickly, because you are talking about it, What is the turnaround right now? Is our expectation if someone was to apply? Do you have any idea, or is it something that maybe I could find out later?
I believe it's been 3 to 4 weeks by the time the state processes the paperwork, so it doesn't take us so long, but when you send it in, and then they go through all of the paperwork to give us final approval, I think it's been averaging 3 to 4 weeks.
So if it's longer than that and a community member has applied, where would they go? What would their next step be?
Contact Human Resources, and they would be able to identify where the application is in the pipeline.
Thank you.
Any further comments?
And that will conclude my comments for this evening.
The board will now move to agenda item 6, public comments. Those wishing to address the governing board will be limited to 3 minutes to speak. The time is projected on the board. We will begin with Athena Westcott.
Good evening, all. I'm very nervous. This is my first time doing this. This is like very last minute for me to come up here. My name is Athena, and I have one child at 8th grader at Kokopah and one as a junior at Chaparral. And let me start off by saying I'm 100% for in-person schooling, have been since the beginning. And I'm up here to discuss the struggles I've had with the school district over the past few months. I believe in our education system. I believe that our classrooms are the best way for many of our children to learn. To me, school isn't about the subject education. It's about learning how to socialize and get along. I had a struggle with my 2 children over the past weekend, and it was regarding going back to school today for in-person. And both my children luckily have been doing well with online education, but as I believe in in-person education, we had a struggle. So my daughter still is attending Kokopah in person, and my son stayed home. And I wish there were, I don't know the answer to the question or the problem or the issue I'm having, but I wish there was more definitions or defining lines of how my child is healthy and can go to in-person, and I want him to be in person. I wish there was more of a, I don't know, not demanding you have to go to school, but I wish there was more something stated in those issues. And you guys just talked about the substitute issue. I applied for my substitute certificate on October 2nd. I received it within 2 weeks, or I was approved 2 weeks later. I got the certificate a month later. I applied for Scottsdale School District on 12/2. I also applied for ESI, which is the system for Paradise Valley, for Tempe, and a whole bunch of other districts. I have not heard one word from Scottsdale School District. I am now hired with ESI, and I've done all my orientation, I've done all my forms, everything has been turned in, and I can start as tomorrow is getting assignments for jobs. So it's the struggle for me is at the last meeting, it was discussed about substitute shortages, and here I had my application out, and I haven't heard anything, so that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. David Hanlon.
Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, Governing Board members, Dr. Menzel. I want to thank you all for your service and your leadership. We really appreciate it. This is my 27th year in SUSD, and it's been the most difficult by far. But I was lucky enough to see Savannah Shorb up there. I had her 4 years ago in 4th grade, and it's really hard to express the feeling a teacher gets of pride when they see a former student really is doing so well. So I was lucky to be here tonight to see that. Just a happy circumstance there. Let's see if I can find where I left off. I know you guys have a lot of people wanting you to do a lot of different things right now, and I'm going to add on to that. So, in addition to being a fourth grade teacher at Hopi Elementary School, I am the vice president of the Scottsdale Education Association. I've been a member of SEA all of my 27 years, so I believe very strongly that teachers need to be a part of the conversation in order to provide the best education possible for the students of SUSD. I've also been around long enough to know that administrators and classified staff also need a voice as well. We are all very hopeful for what lies ahead for Scottsdale. So in conclusion, I hope you consider the importance of recognizing the representative voices of all three employee associations in moving the district forward to provide the best possible learning opportunities for our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim Stafford.
Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Menzel, SUSD personnel, and guests. Earlier today, I forwarded to you a video that was compiled by my daughter, an 8th grade student, that had about a dozen voices of various students at all grade levels in SUSD who expressed their appreciation to the district and to their teachers for why they're back in school, and explained in their own words why in-person learning is so important for them. I know that most of you have had an opportunity to watch the video, and my daughter thanks you for doing that, as do the other voices. But what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is 3 voices that you won't hear on the video, but they're important voices as we consider learning models for secondary school, as we consider threshold metrics that may close a campus temporarily. They're not metrics that we talk about, but they're important voices because they're metrics in their own way, although we don't talk about them. The first one was a middle school student who elected to share her thoughts in writing rather than a video. And she talked about the mental health strain that she was under when the school building closed and she was in online school. She also talked about the appreciation that she gained during her time in online school for her teachers and for the opportunity that she had never thought about before to attend school in person. And she's back at Cheyenne now, and she's very happy and grateful that Cheyenne is providing her that educational opportunity. The second one was also a middle school student, and she expressed in her video the isolation that she feels being online, the depression, the lack of ability to collaborate with her peers, the perceived loss of friendships. And it was a really raw video. As a parent, my heart ached for her. And her parents ultimately did not feel comfortable with her video being shared publicly, which I completely understand because it was raw. But it's a voice that I wanted to make sure you heard tonight. The third was a parent who moved her child here for the opportunity to attend school in person because she saw her formerly vibrant, outgoing, happy junior in high school become withdrawn and depressed. And it turned out she had reason to worry because in her former school district, 9 students have died by suicide in 2020. And so as you're considering metrics, I ask that you keep these students in mind and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. Trish Olson.
Good evening. My name is Trish Olson. I have 3 children currently enrolled in SUSD, 2 middle schoolers and an elementary schooler. All 3 of my children are participating in in-person learning and have been since the option was given to us. I would like to start by saying that I recognize that we are living in unprecedented times and that things are changing quickly and often. I know you guys know this. I know that your job is not an easy one, so before I continue, I'd like to say thank you for your dedication to this district, for working hard to find solutions during these trying times. While I might not always agree with the plans put forth, I can appreciate how challenging your jobs are during this trying time. My comment today is in relation to returning to a full day of school for middle and high school students. I realize that we aren't out of the COVID woods yet, but with the vaccinations being rolled out and the virus having been part of our lives for nearly a year, it might be feasible to think that the positivity rate in our community could start to decline. Even with a high number of positive cases within our community, the individual school infection rates remained very low. Additionally, it has been stated that transmission on campus has not occurred, which only goes to further underline that SUSD campuses have been a safe environment for students and for staff. All thanks to the efforts of being made by the district, the teachers, the on-site staff and administration, students and their families. All of those efforts work toward the same goal of putting students first. With all of that being said, I wonder if there's a realistic plan to get the middle school and high school students of SUSD back on campus for a full day of in-person instruction before the end of the school year. I know there are hurdles, there are logistics and challenges, but these kids have not had a full day of in-person instruction since March 2020. Before we know it, another school year will have passed us by. There are other middle schools and high schools in this area that have been able to manage this task. If there's any chance that even just a small portion of the school year can be salvaged for these kids, I would hope that you all would do everything that you can to help accomplish that for them. The goal has been and should always be putting students first. Getting them back in the classroom for a full day of in-person instruction does just that. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I appreciate everything you all do. Thank you.
Thank you. Samantha Oliver.
Good evening, Dr. Menzel and members of the governing board. I'm here tonight to say thank you. Thank you. I can't imagine being in your position, and I appreciate the thoughtful, proactive, and creative approach the district has taken in standing up 3 different learning models and keeping them going for this long. It's truly incredible. There have been many discussions in recent months about the data and metrics, the what ifs and what cans. Tonight, I wanted to get personal and share my family's experience. My son Thomas started kindergarten this fall at Desert Canyon Elementary. He was in enhanced distance learning like most students, and it was a struggle. My son was born deaf, completely deaf. He uses cochlear implants to hear. We spent years doing therapy, learning to listen and talk, trying to close what felt like an impossible language gap. And then COVID hit. First came the masks. As you all know, it's hard enough for us to understand each other through a mask, and especially difficult for a kid who relies on lip reading. Then came kindergarten on a computer. Imagine listening to your teacher over a tiny Chromebook speaker with a bunch of 5-year-olds who can't figure out the mute button. Thomas was completely lost, and then he got frustrated. But the saddest part for me as a mom was when my curious and engaged son, who always loved learning, lost interest in school. But then September rolled around and the schools opened. His teacher, Miss Carr, jumped right into action, getting the students adjusted to kindergarten in person and a slew of safety protocols, all while somehow finding the time to teach. She also couldn't have been more willing to wear a mask with a clear window and a microphone attached to it. And I couldn't believe it when I learned that the classroom had additional amplification for all of the kids to hear better. In the span of 4 months, Thomas went from not knowing any lowercase letters to reading his first books. He's now doing basic addition and subtraction and talking nonstop about space and the solar system. Not long ago, he corrected me when I called Pluto a planet. Oops. He's excelling at keeping up with his hearing peers. This mom could not be any prouder. Most importantly, he runs down the hill each morning into the school gate, excited to learn. I know that you can never get risk down to zero. And for that, me, my family, we are all so grateful to Ms. Carr and all of the teachers who continue to show up each day and make in-person learning a priority. You are amazing. You are essential. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further public comments at this time. The board will now move to information discussion item 7A, secondary learning model discussion. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I'd like to ask Dr. Guerin if she'd come forward, and I think Dr. Sackos may be joining her in this presentation. This is in response to the question raised by Board Member Beckman at our last meeting in terms of the secondary learning model and how we're addressing the structure in the second semester. Dr. Guerin.
Thank you. President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, Dr. Menzel, Cabinet, Ms. Wagner, and guests. Tonight, we'd like to present and highlight the secondary spring learning model prepared by the Return to Learn Committee. And as Dr. Menzel shared, today was the first day back for our secondary students. And I do want to thank all the parents that shared comments today. It's so important for us to hear from them as we develop these models. Their students are living them. So the first slide I'd like to talk about is the spring models that the committee created. We understood that we needed to create plans that were flexible, that were reversible, and that were created for an ever-changing situation. So we created multiple plans for in-person learning, a plan for students that needed to stay home and learn, and a plan for students who were quarantined or became ill but were still participating. So these were multiple complex models that needed to be able to go back and forth depending on our current situation. I put the arrow up on top pointing toward Plan A because the goal is always to be full day, in person, returning to normal as much as possible. That is what we all want, and we are striving to get there. I put some dates on the bottom of the chart. As you know, we started secondary in January with Plan C, at-home learning for all, for the week of January 4th and the 11th to mitigate risk after winter break. Moving into Plan B, which started today, the week of January 18th, was our 2/3 of a day in-person learning. And again, we have our eye on Plan A with hope in our hearts for the vaccine and the reduction of cases of COVID. I wanted to talk a little bit about the rationale for Plan B. We talked in our committee, we actually brought forward a Plan B that was all day, full day for 50% of the students. So that would have students coming 50% of the time on campus and streaming the other part to have a full day. But we heard overwhelmingly from students and teachers that the 2/3 day was working for them, that there was so much change happening with the pandemic, and this is something that they could count on, particularly when Dr. Sackos worked with her student leaders, the Superintendent Leadership Student Council, and sent surveys out to all the schools. We heard over and over again, can we keep the 2/3 day? So the committee wanted to be responsive. So using one of my new favorite words, second only to hybrid, my second favorite word, pivot, we pivoted to keep the 2/3 day. This reduced passing periods in the secondary level. It eliminated the large lunch challenges. It reduced the number of daily cohort contacts, which is so important when you think about students having to quarantine for so many days. The 3 periods a day versus 6 periods a day reduced that daily contact, allowed teachers more time to focus on essential standards and go more in depth on core content. And then the EDL students were able to access instruction by live streaming alongside their in-person peers. The IT department did a fantastic job installing cameras everywhere and we're very excited to be rolling out some new microphones that allow the students at home to talk to the students that are in the classroom and vice versa. So that's a really exciting pilot we're experiencing right now. The afternoon asynchronous instructional minutes ensure appropriate pacing throughout the curriculum. So expectations for the secondary plan, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sakos.
All right, thank you, Dr. Guerin. The committee extended their work to talk about those expectations for our teachers, and by extension of work, this included additional dialogue with our principals, who also spoke with their teachers, department chairs, the teacher instructional leaders, which we call our TILs, to talk about those expectations for a full day of learning. And so that is that balance of the asynchronous learning in the first part of the day and then the asynchronous learning in the second part of the day. And fortunately, we have two teachers that are with us tonight to show you what that looks like. But here are basically the parameters. An afternoon schedule of extended learning time had to be available for students at home, with the exception of Wednesdays, which is our early release day. Students will engage in rigorous instruction. Students are expected to engage in asynchronous learning, such as independent assignments provided by the teacher when they are not on campus for in-person learning. And lastly, it was very important that assignments will be matched to the pace of the course, as Dr. Guerin had mentioned earlier. The next slide here gives you an example of what a middle school and frankly a high school schedule looks like. Oh, I'm the operator here. Sorry, I thought there was. So this is an example of that middle school schedule. So just to give you an idea. So on an A day, if you will, a student will go to periods 1, 2, and 3. And currently, as they did today, they then go home. They can grab and go get a lunch, and then they go home, or they stay at campus for a safe place to learn. But rather, the location that they're in, that afternoon is then designated for that asynchronous work. And they go to the same periods, the 1, 2, and 3. So it can be an extension of what the students learn that day. Not only do they have asynchronous work, but as you'll hear from some of the teachers, this is an opportunity for them to connect with a student if they're having difficulty in a particular area. And then a B day, for example, would be the other periods, and you see a 4, 5, 6, and a 7 because lunch is actually counted as a period. So obviously we're not given the lunchtime. So again, a student may attend periods 5, 6, and 7 on that B day, and the same process. So with that, our first teacher that we have with us is Angela Bonds. She is a Mountainside World Language teacher, and she is with us up there. Angela?
Hello.
Hi.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you about the wonderful things that are happening for our students during extended learning time. ELT has been extremely valuable for me to provide meaningful feedback to students, reaching out for parents, and for analyzing formative assessment data. Students in my class are assigned specific assignments that are designed to enrich their learning and that are completed during the ELT time. Each day, students have the opportunity to virtually pop in and ask questions about their learning via Google Meet. I've been very pleased with the number of students who have taken advantage of this opportunity. Using the data from the ELT assignments, I have been able to set up differentiated study groups for students and provide remediation. I hope that this gives you a little bit of insight into what students are experiencing through and during ELT. I think it's worth mentioning too that I am only one teacher in a district full of amazing professionals. In conversations with my colleagues, I know that English teachers are sending out surveys and providing enrichment opportunities based on student interest. Our individuals and societies teachers use the ELT time to give the 8th grade civics test. And then we have math teachers that hold targeted small group study sessions regularly. There's a lot of great work going on. So thank you again, and I'd like to introduce my colleague, Carrie Kavanaugh from Mojave Middle School.
Hi, good evening. I'm Carrie Kavanaugh, and I teach 8th grade science at Mojave Middle School. I was asked to provide a quick report on how I am using the extended learning time in my classroom. Prior to dismissing for winter break, I began inviting my enhanced distance learning students to join me via live stream in the morning. This allowed me to practice using the camera system and to get some experience teaching both in-person and live streaming students at the same time. This also allowed me to use the afternoon time as extended learning time. I used this time in December to target students who needed additional help and support. I invited students who were showing low levels of readiness or who had been absent and needed to catch up. I was able to meet with small groups of students and help them finish the second quarter strong. Since returning from break, I've used the extended learning time to provide additional test preparation sessions, to meet with students who are struggling, to meet with students who need to catch up, and to answer individual student questions about both content and my turn-in expectations. At Mojave, and I'm sure at other schools, we have a system in place to ensure that students are making use of the extended learning time. It is one thing for me to invite the students to attend. It is another for students to actually log on and receive the support I wanted to offer. Following our Positive Behavior Intervention and Support Program, or PBIS, students who do not show up when invited are first retaught the expectation. When I invite, students are expected to come. If a student fails to attend a second time, I also again reteach the purpose and expectations of the extended learning time, and I contact parents or guardians. If a student fails to attend a third time, I inform the counselors, who will then follow up with the family to learn if there is something greater going on. Naturally, students who choose to attend on their own to seek clarification or to review concepts are celebrated and work one-on-one with me or with the group to get their needs met. Last week, teachers submitted names for our pause drawing of students who are working together with their teachers to meet success in our classes. They were practicing the W in pause. I am constantly encouraging my students to ask questions when they are stuck. In my classroom, as well as on our campus, we promote a climate that celebrates students who ask for help when needed. The extended learning time supports what we have been long promoting on our campus by offering students the time and direct access to their teachers. I believe the extended learning time is a good layer of support for teachers and students to have during a hybrid teaching and learning. Thank you.
And to close, we have a favorite saying in education: inspect what you expect. We created learning models, and as we're beginning our third week, we are going to ask our teacher instructional leaders for help. We need their help to improve and grow the model. This is a new way of teaching and learning for all of us. And when you bring teacher leaders together from each campus and ask them specific questions and ask them to help problem solve when issues come up, and they will come up, that will help grow the model. It will also help ensure consistency across campus. When one campus is struggling with something, another campus might have a solution. So we're going to start with these guiding questions. When you review the expectation document, and we have an expectation document for each grade level of model, for each grade span of model, what does the actual implementation look like on your campus? And that way we can see where we need to tighten up. What does engagement look like with your students? Are the expectations realistic? And is pacing of instruction keeping up? So we are excited to get into this system of checking, making sure that we can help improve, provide teachers what they need, and really hear what's happening out there so we can ensure student learning is continuing to grow as we wait to get back to that full day of learning. And Dr. Sakos and I, and the teachers, of course, are ready to answer any questions that you have.
Board Member Beckman.
Thank you. I appreciate you bringing this back. Of course, we're going to need to keep talking about it. Can we, again, discuss, and please remind me and the community, Plan A, when we are fully returned, why is it necessary to have that half-day Wednesday? I understand collaboration, but if we're completely back at that point, are we using it for support? Are we using it for identifying learning gaps? What are we doing with that half-day release?
Well, we still will have, even when we provide the full day of learning, we will still have students that choose to stay home for the remainder of the year. That is absolute. So our teachers will be expected to use dual modality, which they will be teaching students at home and in person. And even when we are full day, I anticipate there still will be students that are maybe quarantined or have COVID-like illness. I mean, it's not going to be an off and on switch. It's like a dimmer switch. It's gonna slowly come about. So when we're asking the teachers to do all these multiple things and balance, that half day to plan lessons for all those different modalities, to collaborate with each other and problem solve, I think will continue to be critical as we slowly make our way out of this. The half days are not planned for next year, just for this spring.
Okay, so we're planning them for the rest of the academic year.
That's correct.
For when we are fully returned. Okay, so one last thing, and I'll keep this short. I did notice both my daughters had quizzes today after they came home, so I do appreciate that there's additional learning going on. The slide that we had up there with the, I think our Angela Bond slide, can you define this just one more? So are we using this extended learning time for both assigning additional learning for our kids and opening up, like she said, the Google Classroom, et cetera, for pop-in questions? So is there structure, or please define that for me?
Sure. The expectation is that the teachers are available during these times for students. There are students that choose to join or students that are invited or required to join. Okay. And so those are always available. But there's students that they are assigned asynchronous work. That doesn't mean they have to join the afternoon session unless they're asked to do so for a particular reason.
Okay, and so the asynchronous work is supporting, it's not just a homework. It's
absolutely not.
Okay.
It would be the work, when you're in a class, you have that direct instruction, you have guided practice, you have independent practice. We're taking that independent practice outside of that class time and putting it at home instead. So it's learning that typically occurs in the classroom. We're just maximizing the amount of time that we have with the teacher and having the independent practice at home.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Hartwells.
I appreciate the feedback component that appears now, the teacher instructional leaders, and I didn't appreciate that before, but so that I understand correctly. So this is an effort to try to learn and identify some best practices that are definitely there, and just try to identify those.
And duplicate them and ensure consistency and fidelity across, but also to improve the structure and the model for teachers, because they're going to, they always find a creative way to make it even better. And if that's something that we can take and innovate across SUSD, we'll do that too.
And I appreciate that. I think there's lots of innovation opportunity right now. That's kind of the silver lining in this. Improve the model for students too. So I would be very, have you met already these
No,
these groups?
It is scheduled, and I think it's
just
this
starting.
week.
Okay.
This week, Ms. Redner? Yeah, we wanted to give them 2 weeks to get back, and they were all teaching.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to have maybe just some periodic outcomes from those discussions, and for the community to learn that. I'm particularly interested in that. I think it's a very constructive step, so thank you.
And when we say improve for teachers, absolutely. Improve it so
Yes.
for students. Yes, thank you.
Board Member Sanowski.
Yes, I would like to thank Dr. Guerin. Great explanation. Most importantly, I'd like to thank the teachers that shared just a quick snapshot of what that extended learning time looks like. I know the TILs are very important, but I don't think everyone truly understands unless they're reminded or that they have the opportunity to see it on a regular basis. Our teachers are working extremely hard right now, and as they have been, before the bell, through the day, and beyond the bell at the end of a traditional day. So I want to thank all the teachers out there. I've been seeing some great learning experiences out there. And, yes, can we do better with stuff? Yeah, we can. We can always do better. But that's why we have these learning teams in place, and these teacher instructional leaders are so important to supporting not just teachers, but great learning opportunities for our students. So again, I'd like to thank Ms. Bonds and Ms. Kavanaugh for sharing a little bit of what it takes to get in there and utilize this time. And you probably wish you had a whole nother day of such experiences every day. So thank you all for your hard work with meeting all of our students' diverse needs.
Thank you.
Are there other board member comments or questions? Board member Lindsay?
I've been asked this a few times and I don't have the answer. What kind of checks and balances are there to ensure the asynchronous learning is happening? Is there a certain limit that needs to take place? How is that tracked?
So principals are the evaluators and supervisors of teachers. And Dr. Sakos, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Sure, and I was actually going down that same direction. Is this on? Okay. I was actually going down that same direction in terms of it's the principal and their assistant principals who are continuing to work with their teachers. So when we were virtual, principals would join the classes and log in to see what was happening in the classroom. And that was kind of their walkthrough, if you will. And they also did the observations as well during that time. Now, of course, shifting to in-person, they're able to go into the classrooms a little bit more, but they're also able to join the different asynchronous time in the afternoon and connect with the teacher and see how it's going.
Are there any further board member comments or questions? Dr. Guerin, Dr. Menzel, putting myself in the position of a student or a parent, if I'm not satisfied with the work that I'm given in a particular class from a teacher, it doesn't meet the expectations I would have either in being challenging or time consumption, what should I do?
You should first reach out as a parent or a student to your teacher and ask questions and express concern. That is always the best place to start.
Very good. And if there are any issues there, they would just then follow up the chain of command, go to the principal and so forth.
Assistant principal, absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions regarding the secondary learning model discussion? Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments?
No, I just want to thank the team for reiterating the process and for outlining the content that's associated with the time that's remote. I know that it's a different approach and creates some level of confusion, and so I think it's really important to continue to reiterate all of the work that goes into this, the effort on the part of our teachers and our students to be able to navigate in this environment as safely as possible. So I just want to thank the team.
One last question. I'm sorry, it's going to be brief, but when you said that there are some students that are invited and some students that are required in asynchronous, are those required students, for instance, I mean, we have data now, we just had a semester end, so are those the ones that are required are struggling and we're starting some of those support things through asynchronous?
Absolutely. If there's a student that is not engaging, if they're an at-home learner and they're not logging on and they're not engaging or they're not turning in work or the assessment scores are showing something that the student's just not getting, performing where we would want them to perform or keep pace, the teacher will reach out and say, you really need to come to this after school, and then we'll involve the parent as well if we need to ensure that they get there.
Okay, I appreciate that. And thank you to the teachers as well. I know this isn't easy.
Apologies, Dr. Guerin. Two more questions. First, or one question and a comment. First, Dr. Menzel, Dr. Guerin, when do we expect to move to the Plan A full day of learning? What work is being done to calculate a metric or a time frame for that? Dr. Menzel?
Thank you for the question. We don't know the answer. I'd love to have a crystal ball where I could predict with certainty. But we do have, in the next agenda item, I'll talk a bit more about the building level COVID metrics on the one side of the equation. On the flip side, in order to move from Plan B to Plan A, we need to have a community spread at a much lower level than we have currently. As was mentioned earlier, we're really hopeful that as the vaccine rolls out and as we've moved beyond the holiday spike that we've seen in the COVID spread, that it will create a condition where we could move back to a Plan A. You will recall part of the reason why we ended up with our 2/3 day and leave before lunch was because the Maricopa County Department of Public Health officials expressed their concern that lunch in particular in our secondary schools created an additional potential for spread of COVID. And so they said, if there's any way you can keep the schedule you have now for a period of time until we see an improvement in the metrics, we recommend you do so. So that's what we've done. We hope that we'll see a decline in the community spread and rate quickly. What we don't know is how quick that decline will be. And we'll be prepared to make the shift as soon as the data warrants being able to do so.
I would just like to comment then to Board Member Sanowski's point, and I'm sure not that I speak for the whole board, but I do think we all recognize it, that all of our staff and our teachers included have been working extremely hard, whether they are in person on campus or teaching remotely. I know our district has created systems for staff to even push in, and we've hired teacher aides to monitor those classes. We will discuss, of course, COVID in our next agenda item, but I do just want to reiterate how thankful we are to all of our staff and our teachers for the work that they do every single day. It's not easy, and I truly appreciate it. Are there any final comments or questions before we move to agenda item 7B? Thank you, Dr. Guerin and Dr. Sakos. The board will now move to information discussion item 7B, building level COVID metrics. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. As you recall at our last governing board meeting, we had a discussion about what might the metrics look like, or what would it take to have a building return to virtual learning. And as you recall, last fall, we made a determination as new information became available that we would consider our schools on a school-by-school basis. The evidence in terms of the overall benchmark metrics are that we're in a place where there's substantial community spread. That's been the case for some time. But we also recognize in consultation with the health department officials that looking at what's happening in our schools is really important, and that if we're able to mitigate the spread in our schools, the health department has said they support our schools remaining open for in-person instruction. So given where we are at the present time, the suggestion was made to actually look at the model that Gilbert and Chandler put in place, where they have a percent positive in a building that would result in returning to virtual learning for a period of time. So after the meeting, we convened a committee comprised of teachers, support staff, administrators, central office administrators, 2 lead nurses, and our COVID specialist. The first meeting was held on January 13th, and we spent a bit of time talking about the parameters that were provided by Maricopa County Department of Public Health, the things that they look at when making a determination on what's an appropriate course of action. We spent some time looking at how Gilbert and Chandler had structured their models and how that had changed for Chandler in particular. And then the committee considered, what might make sense for Scottsdale Unified. And at that point in time, we started having a conversation regarding what we saw as a problem with using a percentage as the definitive way of looking at whether or not a building should be open or closed. As you know, a percentage of 300 looks different than a percentage of 2,000. And our 2,000 numbers would be a high school campus. A 300 might be one of our small elementaries. And so as we talked about what additional information we would need to have and know in order to even make an informed recommendation, it became clear that we needed to do some additional work. And so a subcommittee was formed, and Rebecca Kate, who is assistant principal at Desert Mountain High School, Steve Geislinger, our lead nurses, and a couple of our elementary principals, and Whitney Jennings, our COVID specialist, agreed to serve on that subcommittee. And Rebecca is available as a part of our Q&A when we get to that point. But what I want to say is that they worked on Saturday, they worked on Monday, gathering information. So over the course of the week from our meeting on Wednesday, they pulled our historical data. They wanted to understand what we had seen in case counts across our buildings, looking at differentiating between elementary, middle, and high school. Is there a different threshold that should be considered? What other information is necessary in order to make an informed decision? And the parameters really were continuing our use of a school-by-school decision-making process. A purpose statement coming out of their work included the following: enhancing mitigation strategies by creating a metric to determine a switch to and from virtual learning in response to worrisome spread and outbreak. It is felt that this clearly defined metric for the staff, students, and community can provide an anchor to hold on to during this time. And so they've been working with, looking at historical data and considering a recommendation that could be brought forward to the governing board, hopefully at a special meeting this coming Monday, if you're agreeable. We, as a committee, all agreed that we didn't want to rush too quickly. We wanted to make sure that we have gathered the appropriate information and that we've considered this from all angles. Secondly, there's a commitment that it's not a singular data point that's important to consider. Context matters, and we have to consider how all of those things will come into play as a decision is contemplated with respect to whether or not a building should return to virtual for a period of time. We did talk about what we've heard from public health officials that differentiates between our youngest learners and high school students, for example, is relevant information. Another factor that is identified as being potentially relevant for the conversation is when an outbreak has been identified, and even though an outbreak is only 2 by CDC definitions, what's significant about it is those 2 are epidemiologically linked within the building. And the concern is you want to get ahead of the curve, right? If 2 goes to 4, goes to 16, and you do the math, that becomes a worrisome potential for spread. And so it's how do we make an informed decision before you get to numbers that are out of control. Another factor that the committee discussed was should we differentiate between now and February 28th and after February 28th? And the reason why that date is significant is that the vaccination process, the second vaccine will be administered the 12th through the 14th of February. 2 weeks after that gets you to a place where it should be effective at the 95% level with the Pfizer vaccine. I think that's the number I recall. So the committee is also asking, should we be looking at a different threshold before versus after? They haven't decided, but it's on the docket for consideration. And the other thing that surfaced as a concern but doesn't yet have a recommendation relates to secondary sports guidelines. Again, much of what we saw in the fall with respect to COVID cases seemed to be tied to athletics and other activities, and so they just wanted to be sure that we're considering all the factors before making a recommendation. There will be a meeting on Wednesday afternoon of the full committee, another meeting on Friday afternoon. The plan is to then provide that recommendation publicly so that other teachers as well as our parents can raise questions, identify issues or challenges or concerns, poke holes in what's there. Because what we want to do in the final analysis is bring forward a recommendation that the board can support that will provide maybe some more clear guidelines about when a building would return to virtual. We may want to think about, is it just the building level metrics, or is there some additional level of granularity? Is it a grade level, a classroom? What's the scope and scale? And I think all of those are really important considerations. And I am grateful for the work that's been done by the committee so far. And I'd like to ask Rebecca Kate if she would like to add anything with respect to the multiple meetings that the subcommittee has had that I might have missed in this overview.
No, I think. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I think you've covered everything, and I'm here and available for you guys for questions as needed. Our big thing that we really want to make sure is that if there's any additional information and data that you would like us to take into consideration prior to making suggestions, we want to hear you and know what you would like additionally added in. That's the big thing that the committee wants to hear from you guys this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Kate. Dr. Menzel, are you finished?
Yes.
Are there any board member comments or questions? Board member Hartwells.
First, thank you to the committee and subcommittee for your tireless efforts in a very short period of time. However, the urgency is necessary under the circumstances. A couple of questions about definition of terms that appear to be cruxes on which the purpose statement turns. One, worrisome spread, and then two, epidemiologically linked. Can you put a little bit more color on those phrases as you understand them in your analysis to date?
So in terms of worrisome spread, it's a term that has been used by Maricopa County Department of Public Health officials, but without definition. And so in absence of the county identifying what the definition of worrisome spread is, we know it's not an outbreak, because if it was, then they would have closed a lot of schools who had outbreaks. You can check out the number of schools that have verified outbreaks and how many of those are still open, how many are closed, but they haven't closed the schools necessarily or had them returned to virtual. So the thinking is that we would do some development of our own to identify what that might be here in Scottsdale. The second piece in terms of epidemiologically linked is that our, through the contact tracing that we do in partnership with Maricopa County Department of Public Health, a lot of questions are asked in terms of potential exposure and risk. And what Whitney Jennings, our COVID specialist, has indicated is that the county is now regularly interacting with her, and within 30 minutes they're identifying whether or not there are other known exposures that could explain how a particular student or staff member had COVID. So they're working more quickly, as I understand it, to be able to identify that. Now, again, it's based on the evidence that's provided at the time, and so if they can't find another potential explanatory variable, there could have been one, but they might not have been able to identify it, then if you have a linkage within the school that you can verify, that then is, as I understand it, how they determine the epidemiological link.
Okay, so can I just make sure I understood and clarify and kind of restate it back to you? So the epidemiologically linked term, we get that designation through the data analysis at the Maricopa County Department of Public Health. So they're telling us that information based on self-reported data through their contact tracing.
As I understand, it's a combination.
Okay, coupled with ours. Okay.
So information we provide plus information they may have.
Okay, and my last comment is I will be ready for a special meeting whenever they're ready.
Thank you.
Board Member Sanowski.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Menzel, can you please share the current state of our district at this moment? Any concerns you're seeing since our return back to our campuses since the semester break and then this week?
Thank you for the question, Board Member Sanowski. As you know, we update the dashboard on our website every Friday, and so you saw a couple of buildings where they had a higher number of cases in the elementary. Middle school and high school hadn't returned in person yet. And I think this is where it's really helpful to talk about the specific data, because there are a couple of things that surface when we start unpacking the data. And at one of our elementary schools, there was a classroom where there were 3 positive cases. I believe it was 3. And an outbreak was determined for that classroom, and the classroom itself was quarantined. We looked at the number of overall cases in that building, and it seemed pretty high. But then when we started really looking at it, there were 1 case per grade level, no other linkages between those cases between grade level. And in the one grade where there were 2 students, one of the 2 hadn't been on campus because the student was at home for other reasons, and I can't remember the specifics there, but hadn't been on campus. So as we started looking at the real question for us is, are we seeing evidence of spread within the school? And what would the impact be on our students if we were to have a school return from in-person to virtual? Because what we don't want to do is make a decision prematurely if, in fact, we are not seeing evidence of spread in the school because of the importance of in-person learning. We also don't want to delay too long if, in fact, there's evidence of spread that could create an issue for our staff and our students. And so it's finding where that tipping point might be. That's a part of our core work. Another one of our schools reported 6 cases, and earlier today I learned that none of those 6 had been on campus. What happened was they had family members who were COVID positive, and the parents kept the students home. The students then tested positive for COVID themselves, were reported on our metric, but this is an instance where parents have actually done exactly what we asked them to do. If your student is sick or if your family member has COVID, keep your kids at home. And so in that elementary school, there were no notices that went out because nobody was exposed. So the number was reported on the dashboard, but in that case, because of the decisions of the parents, the entire school community was protected from potential exposure. It's that kind of community effort that's absolutely required if we hope to keep in-person education possible while we go through this storm and while we wait for the vaccines to roll out. We don't have, there were 2 schools that showed positive cases that resulted in being just slightly above 1%. One was at 1.35%, the other was like 1.12. So one of the things that I'm hoping that comes out of the committee meeting is to really create sort of a heat map. I want to see what's happening over time, right? Is it a spike, a blip in the data, and then things kind of calm down again? Or do we have some places where it's consistently at this high level? Because that also tells us part of the story. So as of today, that's kind of what we've learned. And I do have to say, I'm really grateful for the work of Whitney Jennings and having a person dedicated to collecting the data, having the regular conversations with Maricopa County Department of Health, and for the work of our nurses, because they are frontline working on this with our staff, with our students all of the time. And so there's just not enough good things that I can say about how much they've stepped up in an environment that none of them really expected they would have to deal with. So that's the other part that I think is important. But we're tracking the data every day and watching for anything that would cause us to need to do something differently.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. And I too would like to thank the school nurses and the committee for putting in this time, and especially like to thank the parents who are continuing to follow the protocols to keep our schools serving in person to the majority of our students.
Board Member Beckman.
So I don't expect that there's an answer for this tonight, and it may be premature, but you touched on it. So I would like our committee to address this, that February 28th date, when we have every expectation to think our teachers and staff would have that second dose of the vaccine and beyond. If we find ourselves in an environment where the community spread is not lower, I would like to know our plan. And I'm sure many parents would too. So while we don't maybe have an answer tonight, I would certainly, because I'm sure many of our families out there think that is the date where, our schools are not necessarily risk-free. I would never say that. But that our teachers that wanted to have received the vaccine and that we're, hopefully far better off than we are. So again, something I would like to have a discussion with regard to.
Board Member Lindsay.
To give some clarity to our community and our staff, do you know, once the draft proposal is finalized, how you plan to share it with a broader group of staff and parents for review?
The expectation would be that we use multiple channels of communication. Likely, depending on when we get it, I would like to have a link in our parent communication that goes out on Friday afternoons. That's the best way, I think, to get it out. And then I would also include a link in my weekly update that I send to our staff That way they can be directed to where the proposal is, and then we'll invite opportunities for comment and feedback, whether that's through Let's Talk or some other designated site remains to be determined, but we'll try to make sure that it's well publicized so that people can know that it's available and share their thoughts and feedback.
Are there any other comments or questions? Dr. Menzel, thank you for this report, and thank you to the committee for all of the work. And Ms. Kate, I appreciate you taking the time to be on this call. Mr. Geislinger was actually one of my teachers at Arcadia High School for AP Statistics, so nice to hear that he was on that committee as well. I think it's excellent news that parents have kept their children home if they've been potentially exposed. That's exactly what we would expect. I do want to reiterate, though, that expectation is ongoing, that we continue to expect our community to adhere to the CDC's mitigation strategies. I will say with my own two eyes, I have seen probably a group of 40 SUSD students meeting outside of school hours, high school students, in a park. No masks, no social distancing, and I appreciate these things happen. It is what it is. I don't want us to view this as a lax scenario. We have received reports not just about mental health issues with our students as a result of school closures and academic impacts, but also a worrying increase in hospitalization of children. So I don't want to give the wrong message that everything is fine and well. It seems, or it would appear based on our data, that things are working in our district, but I just want to keep that in the air, that we cannot, I do not want to say that everything is perfectly okay. Right. But thank you. Are there any last board member comments or questions? Thank you. The board will now move to information discussion item 7C, first read of proposed revisions to policy DD, funding proposals, grants, and special projects. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. In your packet, you have a draft markup of changes to policy DD and DDE related to the threshold for funding proposals, grants, and special projects. You may recall we had some questions that surfaced during our initial board orientation about whether or not that was required, and it seemed like a relatively low bar. So we did some investigation and found out that in fact it's not required. And so this is the proposed change to that policy in order to allow us to operate in a way that actually makes a bit more sense in pursuing grants. Happy to answer any questions on that, but I just want to remind you of the genesis of the questions that came up and the answers that we found in consulting with legal counsel.
Dr. Menzel, if I'm not mistaken, they're not amendments or revisions, but it's actually the removal, correct? Is that correct? Yes, so it's the removal of the policy and exhibit. Do any board members have any questions or comments on the proposed removal? Board Member Hartwells.
I'll be brief. I want to thank the administration, the cabinet, for taking our comments to heart and making this proposal, which I believe is in line with ushering in a modernization of policy to allow for more innovation among the teachers. And so I strongly support this move, and I look forward to seeing those types of things come before the board as we move forward.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? In that case, I believe that the removal can be placed on a consent agenda item unless any board members have any concerns with that. And I believe that can be done. The board will now move to information discussion item 7D, fiscal year 2021-2022 early budget projections. Dr. Menzel.
I'd like to welcome Shannon Crozier to the podium to share the preliminary budget projections. And as you know, you got an early peek at her PowerPoint presentation, but new information has been coming in, so we'll look forward to sharing that with you, as well as kind of laying out the landscape for what to expect in the next couple of months as we complete our budget planning for the upcoming school year. Shannon.
Meeting guests, we're looking at the
early budget estimates for next year, as Dr. Menzel pointed out, we did receive some additional information just over the weekend and earlier today that will make things look a little bit different, but this at least gives an idea of where we're starting from, our start-off point. I put budget terms in just because there's a lot that goes with school finance and budgeting. And if it's new, it's a little bit hard to always understand. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on those, but I wanted them for you guys so that you could always go back to it and look at it and see what we're talking about. The big one being average daily membership. We'll use that a lot. We talk about that as ADM. It's different than student count. It's based off of basically the average students, where kids can come in or go out between a 40-day period or a 100-day period. A couple things to keep in mind with that is that funding for preschool is only for preschool with disabilities. Kindergarten is only for half day. And when we look at ADM for this year, and I don't have that in here, but when we look at that and when we look at for next year, the ADM for Scottsdale Online Learning is based off minutes. So generally when we're putting together our budget, we take a look at the ADM from the current year, and then we say, okay, there's probably 250 or so on average that leave, and it helps us to estimate. That doesn't work for us this year, and that doesn't work for a lot of school districts this year. So we had to do it a little bit differently. So that's why I wanted to point that out. The weights, basically we get additional weights for students that are in pre-K through 12th grade, and additional weights for special needs students, English language learners, and K3 and K3 reading. That is what gets us to our total weighted student count, which is the number that we look at when we start talking about how much we can receive. Some more terms on here. The big one is the general budget limit. That's how much we have for M&O. So when we get to that, that's really the number we're looking at, is what is our budget for M&O. So just a couple of assumptions. Average daily membership, the way that I did it, since I can't use our old method, is basically looked at if the students that we have right now moved back to their home school, what would that provide for us? So that's the number I used when looking at to get the average daily membership for the for this next year. We also know that we, like every other district across the nation, actually lost students because of COVID. I think some of those will come back. We know that our student counts are down really this year, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're in COVID, and if you're starting kindergarten this year, maybe you do kindergarten from home and will be with us next year. So when I looked at that, one of the things I did look at is our average over the past several years. We generally lose 250 to 300. So if you compare where we were going to start with, where we thought we were going to start with this year to next year, it's over a 672 loss of ADM. So because of that, I feel like we have the best guess estimate that we could really do based off of what we're using, based off of what we have for ADM. And since we are funded off of current year, it really becomes at this point the best guess that we can do. So that's kind of how we got to, or how I got to the number for this year. We did it, originally the estimate was a 1% inflation. It's looking better now. It's looking more like 1.22 or 1.23. That's gonna help us out. It's about $300,000. That'll help us out. I don't have that change in here, so this is kind of the absolute worst case scenario, I think. State retirement goes up every single year. That's a mandate that we have to do. We pay it, an employee pays it. So we both put in 12.41 for next year. So that's an increase of 0.19%, which feeds into when we talk later about what can we do to help employees with that. And then the state is supposed to fully restore district additional assistance, or capital. So that should take place this year. So based off that, this is kind of where the estimates lie. Basically a total weighted student count. So that number looks higher than what you think of just student heads. That is based off of the weights that we get. Gets us to 28,003. The increase, we get additional funding because we have teachers with a higher experience. So we get a little bit of a teacher experience index rate.
We can claim our audit expenses from 2 years back. So that gets us to $134 million. But then we get to add on things like our override that passed. We estimate that to be about $20 million. We have DSEG funds. We generally carry over a little bit more than $9 million. We have the past few years. This year our budget obviously took a little bit harder hit. But in looking at where we are, I've been tracking where we are percent-wise of our budget spending last year to this year. We seem to be kind of in line with that. And we know that there's been additional monies that we're going to receive from the ESSER, they're calling it ESSER 2, or the CARES Act, additional funds. So I think we can still do that $9 million carryover, but we'll be watching that closely. So with the other water transfers, Prop 123 is the lawsuit funds from several years back. With that, we get to $170 million. Looking at that compared to our adopted budget this year, where we started out with this year, which is what we've got to base it off of, is a shortfall of $4 million. But I think we can make that up. So, we have some cash accounts that have high balances in them. They're above the min-max that were set by the board. We've been moving expenditures over. 2 years ago, we moved $2 million worth of expenditures. It's essentially salary and benefits for people that we move. Instead of paying them out of M&O, it's paid out of a cash account. There's no difference to them. They don't even know if they're being paid from there. I think we can do another $2 million and still be okay and still be able to do that for a little bit. One thing to keep in mind is that down the road at some point, we'll probably have to start moving some of those things back to M&O, but we'll keep an eye on that. We know that we can go at least a couple years. The property and casualty trust, we transfer $1.2 million from our account over to the self-insurance trust. That account has a really good balance, and we've been seeing about $1 million in interest and investment earnings. So with that, I think we could also hold off on sending that over. That's another one. We do that. We pay that at the end of the year. So if next year we get to the end of the year and we're doing okay, we can make that payment, we'll make that payment. But it's an option of holding that back and not making that payment, and it's not going to hurt the self-insurance trust balances at all. We know that contracted cleaning goes up every year. We know that there's program increases that'll happen. I will tell you $50,000 is a light amount for program increases and little things that happen. SROs might go up a little bit. We find little programs that we do tend to need a little bit more each year. But we put in 50, which is a light number, but I think we can make it work. That leaves us with a balanced deficit of $1.1 million. Because state retirement is increasing, if we don't do anything, if we don't increase salaries, then people will actually see a reduction in their paycheck. So because of that, I put in there a 1% salary increase for all employees. It's not much. It's not the 5% we've been doing, but at least it would provide something so that people don't, you might see a decrease in your check because you changed your health insurance options, but at least it wouldn't be because of state retirement. So that leaves us with a deficit of $2.5 million. It's actually going to be a little bit less because we know that the inflation rate is going to go up a little bit, about 300, but we're still in the 2 million ballpark of being short. I put this in here because it helps to see where our expenditures are. So this is based off of last year's expenditures when we did the presentation to the board on that AFR. For our district and for most districts, 85% of our M&O is salary and benefits. So when we do have to look at things and how can we adjust our budget, typically it falls into that category because that's the bulk of our budget. Doesn't have to be, but that's the bulk of our budget. And I threw this one in here just so that of that 85%, that's salary and benefits, 69% of it is certified, 19% is classified, and 12% is administrative. So you kind of have an idea of those salaries, where do they fall in? And again, I'm not saying we go one way or another, this is just so that everybody has an idea of what makes up our budget and how that's made up. So these are just ideas. I will tell you we have, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, we have several opportunities for our community to give their input. Reductions to certified FTE through attrition due to student count. We keep our ratios the same, but because we've lost students, keeping those ratios the same means we could probably reduce some of those FTE. It doesn't mean riffing or anything like that. It's positions that wouldn't necessarily have a person in it. They're vacant, that we could probably cut some there. I believe, and I think Dr. Menzel's in the same case, is that what we do to certified, we also need to look at classified and administrative. I think there's also reductions we can do there. Again, we have lots of vacant positions. So I think there's areas that we can look at there that save our budget, but don't necessarily mean that we're doing it through attrition. It's not through riffing folks. Other things that we can do, and these are options. I think some options are better than others, but these are options. We have lots of specialty programs, so we can look at those, and if we need to make reductions to those. We could transfer more to cash accounts. However, at some point, those are going to dwindle, and we will have to move some of it back to M&O. So I caution how much we do there. District additional assistance, we're able to move that right now we have it in capital or DA. We can move some of that to maintenance and operations. We know that we're getting a little bit more this year for DA, so that could be an option to look at. And we have a lot of capital needs as well, but that is an option we can look at. Reducing the health insurance payment to the self-insurance trust. I don't think this is the best option, but I'll throw it out there as it is an option, or if we ever got into a bind, it is an option. We essentially prepay that account at the beginning of the year, so we could hold some of that back or not do the full $11 million, $12 million payment that we usually do in the fall. We could hold some of that back, and then if there's a problem, we just don't pay the self-insurance trust. Again, we have to be careful there, whereas we have healthy balances in the self-insurance trust. We are self-insured, so one really bad year, 2 really bad years can wipe a lot of that out. So we do have to be careful there, but it is an option. And then there might be other considerations that folks have that we need to think about that maybe we're not thinking of in the finance department. So we'll talk about this a little bit later as opportunities for feedback on that and how our community thinks we should rank that.
Shannon, I just want to add, one of the things that we think is also important to note is that we don't have a board policy on compensation and benefits, and handbooks that we have, many of those are multi-years in terms of when they were last visited. And so from my perspective, as part of our budgeting process and thinking longer term, it really makes sense to have a comprehensive approach to compensation and benefits if we're serious about attracting and retaining talent. To Shannon's point, 85% of our budget's spent on compensating our employees, but we need coherence in that approach. So one of my recommendations is that we actually work with the policy committee to begin to develop one, because it was a surprise to me that we don't have one, and that will create some framing for us as we tackle some of these other challenges down the road.
This is just looking at the district additional assistance. Again, that's typically our capital fund. Our estimate is 9.6 million. Previously, we got 8.9. So, there is almost $700,000 additional there. We can either use that in capital, or if it's decided we want to move that to M&O. Once you move it to M&O, it's pretty much there. Moving it out means you've got to cut M&O somehow. So that's why I would caution a little bit on it, but it is an option. And then an estimated carry forward of $3 million. We give allocations to the schools and let them, for FF&E, let them know that they can carry over 25% of their original allocation. If what they have at the end of the year is more than that, then we scoop that back up and reallocate it. But that's about where we're anticipating the DAW to be, is 12 million. This one, I put it in here, there's not a whole lot, it's what it is what it is, pretty much. Our override is 8.5 million. those are set guidelines that we have to follow on how we're going to allocate those monies out. So they'll be allocated out like we have in the past. Anticipate 2 million carryover. Schools will keep what they've been given. And so that one, there's not flexibility in with that one. That one, other than the carry forward, that's pretty much what it'll be. The carry forward might change a little bit. And then these are just our cash accounts. MIPS is our Medicaid reimbursement. We are working, we know that we're not receiving as much as we possibly can, so we're working to get that revenue up. But we do have a balance there. That's one we are gonna have to start watching a little bit more to make sure that we don't dip too far below. But as you can see, even with moving $500,000 over there next year, we anticipate that we're still just over the max amount and have some flexibility, so that's why I put that one in there. Civic Center, that's rentals that we receive money on. That's got a really healthy balance. We haven't touched it as much because we allocate a lot of that to our schools for them to use. That is an area that we might have to look at in the future, because that is a very healthy balance. We need to probably get that one down a little bit more because it's way higher than our max. And then indirect costs. Indirect costs are essentially we get indirect costs on our grants, and then food services is really where we get that money from. They are very generous to us with their allocation. So based off of that, just kind of shows, I think 2 million transferred over there next year is not a problem. I think we can do that. So for opportunities for the public, we have on Thursday night a virtual town hall at 5:30. Information for that is on our website along with the link to join. There's the Let's Talk has an option for the 21-22 budget. And then we have a thought exchange out there. The thought exchange basically says this is what our budget looks like, and what we're short is the 4 million. These are some options of ways that we could reduce that budget. How would you prioritize those things? So we can kind of get some feedback on where our community feels would be the best way to look at those options. Just a reminder of our budget calendar. So this is just the first review. We'll have that town hall meeting on Thursday. On February 2nd, I'll be back again with a second review. We'll have updated numbers with where we think we are now with what the state will be giving per student. So that'll be updated. And I'll also have the feedback from our thought exchange, our town hall, and any Let's Talk comments that we get. So we have that feedback as well. March 16th, we'll do proposed salary schedules and employee benefits, what those look like, the cost of those expenses for the district. Then on March 2nd is the big night. March 2nd will be tentative approval so that we can move forward with our budget. That allows us to then also approve the salary schedules, employee benefits, authorization to issue contracts, and then the contracts that we'll send out that early are the certified teachers. We don't do the classified and administrative that early, but that gives us the option of getting contracts out as early as possible to our certified staff. Then April, we'll do the approval of the capital budgets. June is proposed budget. And if all goes well, hopefully June 22nd, we'll have our public hearing and adopt our budget for next year. With that, are there any questions?
Vice President Sanowski.
Yes, thank you, Shannon. I do have some questions.
Okay.
Shannon, are students that we're receiving in through open enrollment right now, are they put into this ADM estimate for next year?
No, what we're basing it on, no, because we also know that there'll be students that graduate. So the number that I used is really based off of what our student count was for this this semester, for January, where we were at. It's hard because we do have the open enrollments that come in, but we also know we have the graduations that happen as well. So it tends to, when we're looking at it, it's not so much by each individual grade level, it's more by grouping of grade levels. So I don't typically take that into consideration.
Okay, I'm just wondering, with open enrollment, are we seeing an uptick in those numbers due to the offering of in-person learning in Scottsdale schools? And then how could that potentially, I guess it's kind of a moot point if you're saying that's not considered though.
Well, with students that are enrolling now because we're open and maybe another neighboring district is closed, that obviously helps our numbers out for this year. However, in total, we know we're down this year from last year.
So, and if I can add, I think from a budgeting perspective, making sure that we don't overestimate our ADM puts us in a better position. The truth is, as a district, we're going to do everything that we can, not only to draw back students that we lost this year for whatever reason, but to encourage others to choose Scottsdale Unified as their school of choice, whether or not they live within our boundaries. So that is going to be part of our commitment. It's the way we grow our economic engine. And we'll work to do that. But from a budgeting perspective, I think Shannon's been properly cautious.
Well, and the flip side of that is it's easier to add $1 million or $2 million to your budget than to subtract $1 million or $2 million. And we've been in both boats. We've been in the boat of where we lost more kids than what we thought and had to cut. And we've been in the boat last year of we cut a bunch in our ADM and oh my gosh, we had far less cuts. And so we ended up with $3 million more than what we originally anticipated. With current year funding, it's just really difficult. And we seem to fluctuate year to year on what our losses are. So I try to do it based off of an average over the past few years of what that loss has been because we fluctuate a lot.
Shannon, past TEI to present, has that also been examined, potential retirement included in this number?
Yes, we're seeing...
I guess there's two parts to this. Past TEI versus current, so look at last year versus this year, and then projection of retirements.
So the TEI has been relatively flat. It is going down slightly each year, and that's going to happen as we see our more experienced teachers retire. So we have been, it's gone down, but the amount that it's gone down has been very, very little. It does affect us, but it's gone down very, very little. As the baby boomer generation starts to retire a little bit more, I think we will see that start to go down more and more as there's just a group that's more prevalently retiring than normal. So it has been going down, but we've been fortunate in that it's been very, very, it's been like 0.001 that it goes down. In fact, from last year to this year, or I'm sorry, for this year to next year's budget is like 0.001 change.
Appreciate that. Question on the water saving transfer.
Yes.
What is that?
That is, we have these lease agreements with like Mid-State and a couple of other places for the solar, for the energy lighting projects. Those lease agreements, how they're set up is we transfer money from M&O over to another fund for those lease agreements. And then in theory, we're supposed to save money from those projects. But that water savings transfer is transferring money over for the principal and interest on those lease projects.
Okay, and then I think this is my last question, if you don't mind. You had mentioned the decrease in certified health insurance payment to the self-insurance trust. How would that impact the health care benefits to our employees?
It wouldn't. We would. So what happens is instead of, we would still take that portion, like if there's a portion that the employee is paying, that would still go. But the district pays a huge portion of that out of our M&O to cover, because we essentially cover health insurance for our employees. So the bulk of that comes from actually our M&O or wherever the employee is funded from, but essentially M&O. What we would do is, if the amount that we should transfer is, say, it's generally $11, $12 million, maybe we only transfer $10 million over out of the M&O. instead of the full amount. I caution against it, but ultimately that is an option if that's what's decided upon.
And then can you do us a favor and provide for the governing board members possibly a list of these specialty programs that you had referenced?
Sure. Nope. And essentially those are things right now off the top of my head. We're talking about like there's dual and language programs, there's the IB programs, there's the MYP, there's the early year program, AVID. Those are some of the, just off the top of my head, those are some of those. I don't know that that's all of them, but that's the prevalent ones. And again, I'm not saying that's the way we need to go. I think we can fix this other ways. But again, ultimately, those are options.
Thank you, Shannon.
Board Member Beckman.
So I want to take a step back, Shannon, and see if you can spend some more time on that health insurance trust payments. I'm a little bit concerned, and I want to just kind of have this discussion now that we've had a healthy cash reserve balance in that health insurance trust. So what we've done is we have covered the increase in our benefits to our employees so that they wouldn't be impacted this year and the year before, and maybe even the year before that. I think it was 6% one year. So my concern is A, the question, are we going to do that again? B, we really need to have a discussion and give our employees a heads up in this budget environment that if we get to a point where we can't do that, they are going from this level where they used to pay, and we have covered the increase along the way, and then all of a sudden if we stop, here's this significant jump when they've had a 1% increase, right? So can you speak to that a little bit?
We don't have the estimate yet. We'll get that probably in February as to what they feel we should possibly look at increasing our health insurance to. So we don't have that estimate yet. That is again another option. Whether or not if the budget can afford it, we look at that, or if we feel that no, we need to look at passing that on, or maybe incrementally. If the increase is 6%. Maybe we only do 1 or 2% to incrementally bring them up. Those are all things that we can definitely look at, and none of those decisions have been made for next year because we don't even know at this point what that increase in insurance will be. We've had really good years with insurance, but again, 1 year can change everything. So that's a decision that hasn't been made, but that's one that the board and the self-insurance trust insurance will have to look at once we get that figure from Kairos.
Right, and I would want to make sure that we are very deliberate in our discussion so that we don't catch our employees off guard, because that is significant. Second question, our administrative expense, did that go up? It's 12%. I thought we always kind of tried to keep that under 10%, and obviously if the overall budget.
I mean, we've been giving increases to all of the employee groups, and so and we did bring back. We had APs at elementaries that were deans. We changed that a year or two ago to actual APs. So that changed. That's an administrative cost, and so that changed it a little bit. So I think that's what bumped it up a little bit. But based off of what our actuals were, the other part of that is if you have vacant positions in one area. This is looked after the total expense, so it could skew it a little bit if you had a lot of vacant positions, or like if we had a lot of vacancies in certified and less in administrative, then that could skew the number a little bit because it's based off of the totals.
Can I just clarify, Shannon, the slide you put up was percent of salaries.
Yeah.
Not total expense.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, that is just percent of salaries too. That's not the total percent. Okay. No, our dollars in the classroom I see what you're going. The dollars in the classroom, yes, that's lower. This is just based off of salary and benefits, the breakdown within our salary and benefits.
Okay. And then quick one, when does the capital override expire? Soon.
Oh gosh, off the top of my head, 23, 24 school year.
Okay. Last question, I'm trying to be quick. Okay. Indirect costs with food service. Yes. I know we have a healthy cash balance. at some point, I'd really like to see where they are, if they're struggling, how COVID has impacted them, and if we can use that cash balance to help them a little bit. I know we shore them up sometimes with their expenses, but that's a big discussion that I kind of would like to have when you throw up a cash balance like that.
Sure. So we'll be doing another review of how we are this year shortly. And so that's one of the things we can definitely include in there. One of the things that's really helped out food services is that all students, regardless, are considered free lunches, breakfast lunches. We're doing dinners. We've also, Patty's looking at doing what's called a dinner and a snack. And so she can get reimbursed for that as well. There's also some programs we're looking at that have come out through the federal government that also might help that department as well. So she's doing not as well as she normally does in a school year, but she's doing much better than what was originally anticipated. Earlier this year, it was a little bit scary. We also know that we have to watch community schools has had a rough year, so we're watching them as well because they've lost a lot and they don't have some of the revenue sources like food services. So we are watching those two, but I will say that Patty is doing much better than what we originally anticipated. So it's not great, but it's not as bad as we feared it could be.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Board Member Hartwells.
Yes, thank you. That's a nice segue because my question was on the indirect costs, the cash accounts, and you named the food services. So you're speaking to the USDA contracts that are coming in, whether the indirect rate is set by the federal government, right?
So we have an indirect rate that is set that we can receive from food services. It's 25%. And so based off of where their revenue is for the year, we take that 25%, which generally is about $1 million for us.
And that's USDA money, ultimately, the original source?
It includes all of their revenue, which is beyond just USDA money. I mean, this year, it's pretty much USDA money. Okay. But in a normal year, they also receive money through catering and food sales.
Okay. Yes.
They have a really robust catering program that usually.
And you mentioned grants. Is that what the district's indirect cost is, fringe?
Yeah, for grants, it is not that. It changes. It used to fluctuate, but we're getting it a little bit more stable. So last year it was 4%. There was a calculation error that happened a few years back, and so this year has been 0. That should be fixed for next year, but it's generally around the 2-3% for grants.
That's really low. Okay.
It's low.
Indirect costs are real costs. That's why I think the number's pretty low.
Yeah. What we get off of it is very low. The bulk of what we get for indirect cost revenue really comes from food services.
I share Member Beckman's interest in looking at that cash account.
Absolutely, yeah. When we do a Q2 review, we'll definitely have the food services on there.
Are there any other questions or comments? I think there are a couple comments I would like to briefly make. The first is, as we know, we've been discussing the formation of a couple more committees, small superintendent committees. 2 of those I think are highly relevant to this discussion. One would be marketing and communications potentially, and the other one would be a finance and benefits committee. And we think we're hoping to move forward and better formulate those that board members can serve on. And I think that will also help craft the conversation going forward on addressing these issues. And the other comment I would like to make is, as we saw this year, we projected $174 million in M&O revenue. And for next year, we're projecting $170 million. And again, I appreciate you explaining how about 85% of that goes to our salaries and benefits for our staff. There are so many things that our district and districts in urban, suburban, and rural areas in our state want to be able to do, to provide psychiatrists and psychologists for our students, to provide counselors and guidance counselors, to provide permanent substitutes, as we've done. We have one for every school, but we would like to provide more because even in non-COVID years, that need exists. We want to have internal auditing. We want to really provide an exceptional product for our students. And we do. Our staff bend over backwards to provide that product to our students every year, whether there's COVID or not COVID, but it isn't enough. The ratios that we've discussed as a board before, counselors to students, hundreds of students per counselor, hundreds of students per para. special needs. We need more, and it's hard to recruit bus drivers. So when we talk about this, it seems like a lot of money. A lot of people point to this and go, oh, our district has all this money and it misspends it. Well, like any organization, I'm sure that there are ways through internal auditing that we can find savings. But at the end of the day, in order to have those smaller ratios and to have the smaller class sizes, to have the support staff to work with our students every day that make those students want to come to our district and happy, we just need more. So I hope people don't look at this and go, oh, the district has all this money and it's doing nothing with it, and look at we're doing everything we can, and our staff do everything they can to provide a very high quality education. And I just want to thank again our staff, our administration for taking that time. Are there any final comments or questions? Thank you very much. Unless any of my colleagues have any objection, I would like to recess for 10 minutes. Is that acceptable? The board will recess for 10 minutes and reconvene at 7:04 p.m.
Oh, here we are.
The general meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board will resume at 7:08 p.m. We will now move to the approval of the consent agenda as amended. The chair moves to approve the consent agenda as amended. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the consent agenda as amended. Is there any debate? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Vice President Sinowski? Aye. Thank you. The motion passes 5-0. The board will now move to consent agenda item 8L, authorization of expenditure, support facilities, lobby security improvements, warehouse, IT, print shop, transportation, and building services. Board Member Hartwell's requested that this item be pulled, and we will begin with Board Member Hartwell's. Board Member Hartwell's.
Thank you. I asked that it be pulled so that it could understand why the 3 builds in one proposal and just have a little bit more meat as to why we're asking to spend $187,000 right now on a lobby update, facility improvements. And Mr. Rayler, I know you've given me some feedback, and I appreciate you giving me that feedback, but I still remain a little unclear as to the timing, particularly given the context of tonight's meeting with budget shortfalls. So if you could add a little bit more, I'd appreciate it.
Good evening, President Greenberg. First time I've said that. Members of the board, thank you for the question. The budget shortfall and this project, I think you can very easily separate in that the monies that we use are for capital use in support facilities. In our buildings that cannot be used, bond monies can't be used in those areas. So there are no other revenue source or are no other funds that we have available to us. District additional assistance in years past has been very, very narrow, and we typically use that at the schools and not on our support facilities. So we've finished all of our work on the front office remodels and secured all of our campuses. So now it's time to take care of our classified employees and get those buildings secured as well.
So could you be more specific about what kinds of security we're talking about here?
So in the case of the front offices at those 3 facilities, specifically the warehouse, double set of doors, open lobby, stairs to upstairs, full access to the building once you've opened the door. In the case of building services and transportation, it's actually one building, 2 sides of the building with departments on either side, no central reception. And so have you been to the schools to see the work that we've done at the schools?
We're talking about these facilities. These aren't the school facilities that we're talking about under this proposal.
Yes, but have you seen the school facilities?
I have been to the school facilities, yes.
So the glass, the high impact glass, security doors, those are the things, those key things to keep visitors in the lobby and not mingling with the staff, not working themselves through the building. So that's, and this is, when you look at this total project, 3 buildings, 3 lobbies at $186,000 in comparison to any one of our front offices that range from $152,000 at the least at Coronado to well over $500,000 at Laguna and Sequoia. So we've done a minimalist look at it to try and meet the needs of those classified staff in those classified buildings without going extravagant, without doing full ceiling reworks, without reworking air conditioning, without reworking anything. It is simply glass across the front, an access door, access points that you have to be authorized to go through, and that's really it.
And currently, there's no authorization point to walk into the building at the warehouse. Anyone can walk in.
So at the warehouse, there is a call button that you can call to various people within the building, but there is no personnel at the front of the building. So once you're in, if there's someone standing there behind you, they can come in too. It's a little bit more cumbersome than we would like, and now with the traffic, all of the COVID traffic, people bringing in their computers to have their computers repaired, we'd like to streamline that and provide better customer service by having an actual lobby downstairs.
With that comment, that you're referring to the IT facility, not the warehouse or the...
Well, the warehouse, IT, the print shop, security office, asset management, we've got a whole host of folks down there. It's not just the warehouse, it's not just IT.
But these are 3 separate contracts
So we have
that you're asking.
building services,
Yes.
transportation, and then our warehouse building that also houses multiple departments within that building. And it is 3 separate POs that we would write to Chase Building Team for those 3 separate buildings.
Okay, so in your comment back to me about the traffic, and you cited that as an issue, is that there's public traffic in the IT area as a result of the circumstances this year, but not necessarily in the other 2 facilities.
So no, transportation and building services do not see a ton of public traffic. It is more the staff traffic. So we've got, in both cases, very small lobbies at building services and transportation, very small lobbies, and both receptionists that are in those areas are very concerned about their exposure to COVID. And so one of them has been working at home. So now the lobby's wide open at building services, and there's no one up front. And the other one, the secretary has been, we've moved a storage room out and moved her into a storage room so that she can stay at work.
If I may interject here, we do not usually visit those buildings, but the warehouse, which is actually quite nearby, there is just a door. You open the door, and once you're in, there's a staircase up to the atrium. There's offices everywhere. There is no security lobby, if you will. There's no checkpoint, check-in. There's nothing. Once you slide that badge and you open the door, you have full access. We have in that specific building, we have everything ranging from our IT department with our servers, which is a very cool room, to the warehouse in the back that actually ships out all of the items to all of our schools when they're requested. So I think the point is to build that security barrier lobby so that people can come in, but they can't just access the entire building once they step foot inside.
That's correct.
Board Member Beckman?
Is this coming out of bond? Is it life cycle, or are you doing, how are you?
No, this is coming out of plant
Capital?
fund. So plant fund, 500.
Okay.
And that's money that's generated from the use of our rental facilities and from the sale of property.
And there's no thought that these areas are going to need to be remodeled in the near future, or we're going to be tearing down what we're doing today, like in the next couple of years or 2? I know that's a kind of a difficult question.
Yes, unless somewhere, somehow, we get a whole lot of capital dollars, no, there won't be any
Or
additional
moving
work.
departments, or, okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
Not that I've been made aware of.
Board Member Hartwells, were you raising your
I
hand?
have no more questions. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Mr. Railer.
Vice President Sanowski, do you have any questions or comments?
I do not, but thank you for asking.
Are there any other questions or comments about this item? The chair moves to approve consent agenda item 8L, authorization of expenditures, support facilities, lobby, security improvements, warehouse, IT, print shop, transportation, and building services. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Lindsay seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve consent agenda item 8L. Is there any debate? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
That motion carries 4-1 with Board Member Hartwell's voting no. The board will now move to public comment on action items. There are no public comment cards at this time, so we can move to agenda item 10A. However, before we do so, absent any objection from my colleagues, I would actually prefer to skip first and address item 10C, acceptance of donation for installation of Chaparral baseball and softball field lighting. Is there any objection to that change? The board will first move to action item 10C, acceptance of donation for installation of Chaparral baseball and softball field lighting. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I would like to introduce Principal Todd Dreifert from Chaparral High School, who will introduce the other individuals he has to join him with respect to this presentation of the donation of lights at the baseball and softball field at Chaparral. Nathan Slater is our athletic director. And
Board Member Greenberg, President Greenberg, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, cabinet members and guests, thank you for having us this evening. Tonight we have a presentation to potentially have a gift of approximately $500,000 to put on lights on the varsity baseball field and the varsity softball field at Chaparral High School. And I will let Principal Dreifert do the introductions.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Before we get going, I'd like to recognize some individuals that are here this evening. Baseball Booster Club President and Vice President Dr. Jonathan Hott and his wife Tracy Hott. Qualite Vice President Nick Page, who flew in just for this meeting. Roman Schleybaugh, the Regional Sales Rep for Qualite. Coach Troy Gerlach, who's our head baseball coach. And Mr. John Kemp, who is our head softball coach. They are here with us this evening. Thank you. And as Mr. Slater referenced a second ago, we are here before you to request your approval to accept an incredibly generous gift of approximately $500,000 to place lights on the baseball and softball fields at Chaparral High School. And this gift is anonymous, just so you all know. So we do not know who the individual is who is making this incredible donation. So in case you haven't been out to our baseball or softball fields, there are two of the best fields in the valley. If you haven't been out there, I would encourage you to do so soon. In fact, the baseball field in 2013 was named Field of the Year by the National Baseball Coaches Association. It's a very, very prestigious honor. Obviously, I'm going to have to get on my coach to get out there. It's been 8 years since that thing was given an award, so he's going to have to get on the tractor and put out a little bit more effort, I think. So just something to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, early in November, our head baseball coach, Coach Gerlach, was contacted by the president and vice president of the Booster Club, letting him know that an anonymous donor had approached them about placing lights on the baseball field. This was not just for the lights, but also for all the costs associated with the project. Coach Gerlach relayed the information to myself, our high school athletic director, Mr. Bodie, and Mr. Slater. After that, an hour-long meeting was set up on November the 19th, and you could see who all was in attendance. And some of the topics that were discussed were the process for accepting the donation, working with the contractor, and communicating with the neighborhood about the installation. Another date was also set up roughly a month later, which allowed us to have a little bit more time to get additional information. A Zoom meeting was held on December the 16th. And again, topics discussed were setting up the community meeting, district policies on accepting donations, Title IX implications, working with the city of Scottsdale to get proper permits, and a discussion of the project specs. Now, an important part of this whole process was Title IX. Originally, the plan was to only place lights on the baseball field. But per Mrs. Marshall, she did some research and looked into some case law, Chambersburg Area School District in June of 2020, and Daniels versus School Board of Brevard County, Florida in 1997, where they said
Booster clubs provide benefits or services that assist only teams of one sex. The district must ensure that teams of the other sex receive equivalent benefits and services. So after she came up with the research, we kind of felt, well, this was a great effort, but unfortunately, we're probably not going to be able to move forward. This information was relayed to the Booster Club president, who relayed it to the anonymous donor. Lo and behold, the anonymous donor, without any thoughts, any reservations, said, you know what, I'll pay for the lights on the softball field too. So just an incredible, generous gift. So with that in mind, it was like, hey, we're moving forward. So we set up a date and time and established a community meeting. You can see the flyer that was created with the Qualite and our district's communications department. This was placed on the school's Twitter account, webpage, Peach Jar, Nextdoor, and it was also mailed to individuals within a half-mile radius of the high school. So on January the 7th, we held a community meeting. Qualite made a presentation, which was outstanding, very, very detailed, went through just about everything you could think of. We had about 36 individuals in attendance, and that included members of the Chaparral High School, also SUSD, and community members. Questions were typed into the chat box and answered by members from Qualite, Mr. Slater and Mr. Bodie. The biggest concern, and the obvious concern, from members of the community was light spillage. So if you take a look at the next examples that I have, these are all Qualite projects. If you take a look at the periphery of these fields, you can see that the light does not extend much beyond the field itself. So I know we have one individual in particular out beyond the left field line, and we have a house there that they were very concerned initially, but I think their concerns were put to rest just by speaking with Qualite and also seeing some of these pictures. Again, here's another example. Not too far beyond the field itself, it remains somewhat dark. And here's lastly another project they did. So this is kind of revolutionary technology that they use. It's pretty incredible. Obviously, they can speak to it more than I can if you have any questions about it. So what are the benefits to this? Well, the biggest benefits, the obvious one, is less class time missed. Right now, I think our students get out about 10 o'clock in the morning, eat breakfast, get a stretch, massage, I'm joking. They get out about, sorry. They get out, I think they usually get out after sixth period. So they miss the last period of the day. That way they get to the field, they get the opportunity to get warmed up and get ready to go. And so our baseball games usually start about 3:45 and our softball games start at 4 o'clock. What we plan on doing is moving those games back to 6 o'clock. So there's not going to be any class time missed. And then plus the other benefits, parents can now come to the games. They don't have to worry about missing work. Our student body can attend the games a little bit easier. A large majority of our students participate in spring sports, so they can come after practices. Being the wonderful students that they are, most of them can go home and get all their homework out of the way and then come back, so they don't have to worry about it a little bit later. College coaches can now attend. Most of you know the college coaches, the colleges practice in the afternoons. They usually get done around 3 or 4 o'clock, sometimes a little bit later. So by playing at 6, this gives them the opportunity to come over and see our kids play, which is a benefit because now more of our baseball and softball players are being seen and getting those opportunities possibly to go on and play at a different level. Professional scouts makes it easier for them to attend some of our games. We have some outstanding baseball players coming through the next several years. So that's a benefit for them. Games don't have to be played during the heat of the day, which is another bonus. And there's also a financial benefit towards it with all this because now we can now rent out our field to Little League teams or youth camps, tournaments, because these lights will now provide opportunities for them to play a little bit later into the evening. So it's a benefit for them too. So basically this is a win-win for everybody. I really hope that you guys will approve this. The donors one of these days will come forward and announce themselves, but just incredible generosity on behalf of them. So at this time, I will turn it over to you all for any questions you might have.
Principal Dryford, you had mentioned, or I believe Mr. Slater, you had mentioned that we have some guests either from the company or from the district. Do any of them wish to come and speak? Is there?
I'm here for technical questions. I don't have anything to add necessarily. Just to get questions for you.
This is Mr. Page, who's the vice president, and
So
Mr. Slayball, who's the regional representative.
Vice President of Engineering. I designed the fixture and then I worked on the design, the actual lighting design for this project. So I can hopefully can answer any of your questions.
Thank you. Board Member Beckman.
I don't really have technical questions for you about the product. I've seen this before, but I do have questions for Mr. Slater. So this is incredibly exciting for Chaparral, and I applaud the donors for thinking of our public schools always. First of all, is there any maintenance that is going to be required that the district is going to have to pay beyond what we normally pay for lighting at this school?
I would think, and I could defer to Dennis on that, but I would think that we would have to pay the electric bill, of course. That would be part of the actual lights themselves.
And is that the same as is there currently, or is that going to be an additional cost to what we are normally providing for Chaparral's lighting?
That would be an additional expense. There is no ball field lighting currently, other than the football field. So it would be additional expense. We don't know what that is right now, but being that they are LED lighting, I would imagine they are super efficient. And it's not like they'll be on all day, every day. So I can't imagine the cost will be significant, but it will be some cost to the district.
Okay, I would like to see what that additional expense is going to be. And then you just touched on my next question. Do any of our other high schools, while I'm so excited for Chaparral, we have 5 high schools, and as a board, we represent all 5 high schools and are concerned about all 5 high schools. Do we have any lighting at any of other baseball fields in the district?
Yes, we do. To go back to your previous question, I apologize, is the lighting does come with a 25-year warranty. So that would, anything that goes wrong with those lights would be covered. So the additional cost, we could estimate what that would be in the next couple days. Right now, the only other high school that has lights is Arcadia Baseball. Ironically enough, when I was in high school, I played under those lights in 1988, so they've been up for quite some time. We do also have lights on the baseball fields at Ingleside that is primarily used by the Arcadia Little League on the 2 fields at Ingleside. So at this time, it's only Arcadia varsity baseball that has lights.
Okay.
And of course, the football fields and
So,
soccer fields.
I will defer then to ask Ms. McClellan. I know that Title IX was quite an issue here, and I can appreciate that. Do we have any equity issues with regard to any of our other, I mean, there's some valuable benefits here that I obviously can't underestimate but one of them, obviously, right up there on the screen is saying less class time missed. So when I think of all of our other 5 high schools, I certainly have to ask you if this is going to pose any problem that one of them is getting such a wonderful gift from a community member, and I'm happy to hear it. It is fantastic. I just want to make sure that we don't see any issue by accepting such a wonderful gift for one of our schools.
President Greenberg, members of the governing board, can you hear me? I don't know if my mic is on. Thank you, Dennis. President Greenberg, Ms. Beckham, members of the governing board. The district has this eternal equity problem because you do have different boosters that support different programs in different schools. This is no different than that analysis. The district had obtained a legal opinion from outside counsel. Ms. Marshall went to Dave Paoli to obtain a legal opinion regarding the issue of the Title IX, and the resolution that the Booster Club has come up with is sufficient legally. So to address the Title IX issues, the more global equity issues would only be solved if you merged your booster clubs or did some type of more global spreading.
Okay. Thank you.
Vice President Sanowski.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I do have a couple questions, and thank you to board Greensburg Beckman for asking her questions because they were on my list as I was listening. Will the softball fields be built first, is my first question.
They're going to be installed concurrently, is my understanding.
Yeah, just with installation purposes, I think with the electrical runs and stuff, I think that they're going to start with the baseball field, but also make those runs to the softball field in a timely manner. So both pretty much at the same time.
Okay. And what would, you had mentioned community input, and I really appreciate that there were mailers mailed out because not all of our residents that would be impacted by this have students in our schools. So I really appreciated that effort. My question is, what time would those lights be turned off on a regular basis? What is the on-time limit?
Great question, Board Member Sanowski. Is the general time that we like to go by is 10 o'clock on Friday nights for football. Games start at 7, and we can generally, unless there's some kind of crazy overtime game, be off the field with the lights off by 10. For baseball, if it's good baseball, if we start at 6 o'clock, we can't foresee us not being able to hit that goal. That was a question that was raised at the community meeting, and we addressed as 10 o'clock is generally the nighttime that the time of night we want to turn them off.
All right, thank you very much.
Board Member Lindsay.
Is there any idea on the revenue that these lights could bring in, just estimated annually?
We'd have to probably defer to Dennis on that one as well. It depends on the amount of use that we get. The problem is those fields, we have to have time for them to be overseeded. So there's a large chunk of the year that we would not rent them out. We would not rent them out most likely during the season as well. But there is some opportunities in the summer when the grass is Bermuda and potentially into the fall a little bit.
And then the revenue would benefit the whole district or just Chaparral?
No, it would go into the rental pot that Dennis uses for his cool projects at the warehouse. Okay. You want to talk about the rentals, Dennis?
So it's really hard to estimate what kind of volume we would have, but understand that the more you use a grass field, the harder it is to upkeep. So I would suspect on that baseball field that we would need to use that revenue just to take care of that field because we want to make sure that it is ready. If you've seen our baseball fields throughout the district, they're probably the best baseball fields in all of the state, if not the western United States. They are very well taken care of. And so to add that additional usage, it will really tear them up a little bit. So we want to make sure that we limit that. We get the highest revenue we can. So maybe it's some adult leagues or something that will generate more revenue than, because our kids, the way our facility use agreements are set up, district kids we don't charge those teams. And so we'll have to be very selective as to who we allow to rent, when we allow to rent, because obviously the coaches want the fields to be in perfect shape when they start their season. So we haven't fully explored that, but it's not going to be an enormous amount of revenue. It'll be some revenue, but not an enormous amount.
I'd add a point to that too. And just to let you know where you're saving as well is on the KW cost between LED and HID. So for example, your football field's probably costing around $36 for a 3.5-hour game. The LED will run about $12 for 3.5 games. So you're saving as well on that on long term as well.
Thank you.
Board Member Hartwells.
Just real quick, under the warranty, you mentioned the 25-year warranty. I noticed, and that's the extended warranty, and I'm based on your website.
Yeah, for 25 years, we cover parts, labor, and equipment on site. We take care of everything. There's no maintenance to the end user at all for 25 years.
Okay, so light replacement. And then I did notice in the schematics, the torque specifications due to wind, you'll do that each year? It's recommended?
Yeah, absolutely. We check light levels, make sure that it's all
Great.
in compliance and all that stuff as well. We take care of all that as well.
Great. Thank you to
You
the
bet.
donor. Very generous.
Are there any further board member questions or comments? I would just like to thank the administration, the Booster Club, and the donor as well. As we would say in my household, it is a real mitzvah So thank you very much. And the chair moves to approve action item 10C, acceptance of donation for installation of chaparral baseball and softball field lighting. Is there a second to the motion? Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 10C, acceptance of donation for installation of chaparral baseball and softball field lighting. Is there any further debate? All in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries 5-0. Congratulations.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
The board will now move to action item 10A, approval of school calendars. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I would like to invite Cheryl Redner and Dr. Fountain, I believe, to do the presentation, to review the recommendation of the calendar committee. Cheryl.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Snowski, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and Mrs. Wagner. It's a privilege to present to you the recommendations for the 2022 through 2025 calendars, as well as provide a brief overview of the process and details of our recommendations for your consideration. I first want to take a moment to recognize the committee who provided input and gathered feedback from their specific stakeholder groups. We had voices from across campuses, district leadership, as well as parent groups. Members of the committee are joining us in the cloud, and I want to make sure that you know we really appreciate your support. This has been a thorough process that began in November. We gathered input several different ways, including Let's Talk, a Google survey, as well as providing information in weekly internal communication through Teacher Talk and Admin Inbox. Dr. Fountain, our Director of Professional Development, will share the key findings from this input.
Right behind you. All right, thank you. As you can see, and Ms. Redner mentioned, we had a variety of methods that we used to collect some information and input. One of the significant pieces, of course, is the committee members themselves, and then being able to communicate with stakeholder groups, including the parents that were on the committee and classified and certified and administrative staff. But in addition to that, we gathered a lot of input using the Thought Exchange. You can see some of the key considerations that are up on this slide right here. The first one, which we're working on tonight, is to publish that calendar well in advance because folks want that for planning purposes, so we're trying to continue to move this forward. There were some comments on Thought Exchange regarding the early release Wednesdays, which I know was brought up earlier in the evening as well. Not the scope of our committee, but we wanted to honor that that was a comment that was brought into play. And then just honoring the traditional breaks, including fall, winter, and spring, to give students and staff time to rest and reset. One other piece that was not on the top considerations, but came up particularly in our parent input, was the desire to consider starting school later, like September, as many of the East Coast folks do. Probably had an equal input and interest to make sure we were done by Memorial Day. That becomes an interesting mathematical problem because we have 180 school days to get in. So if we start in September and we end in May, we don't get there. But we do want to honor that that was an interest within the community. So we're going to present to you the recommendations from the committee this evening. The board members should have a paper copy in front of them. For folks in the audience, there are paper copies on the way in. And if you're with us virtually, if you look underneath the board agenda for this evening, you'll find a link to these calendars as well. The first one being the recommendations for the 21-22 school year calendar. This is an interesting year based upon where the winter recess falls. And our recommendation from the committee was to begin midweek, which is a Wednesday, August the 4th. You can see that we have the traditional fall break there in October, the 11th to the 15th. Because of the midweek start, we also recommended a midweek finish for the first semester, which would be ending on a Wednesday, and then the break would start on a Thursday. You can see the spring break and the last day of school. One of the major considerations that came into play that with the committee and that we gathered input on was the desire to have balance whatever possible between the quarters and the semesters. And so you can see that that is represented on this calendar here, and one of the reasons why we considered a couple of the unique pieces such as the midweek start. We do want to note that one of the concerns with this calendar that came into the balance between quarter one and quarter two was the proximity of the fall break, and that also encompassing the existing PSAT assessment. But there is an alternate PSAT testing date later in October, And our assessment department shared with us that we have frequently used that alternate date in the past as well. So there is still an option for PSAT dates, but we wanted to acknowledge that it does fall during that time frame. The committee recommendation for the 22-23 calendar would look very similar in a midweek start in early August. Again, that October fall break. The winter break, again, being a midweek finish on a Wednesday, and then the break starting on a Thursday. The spring break being mid-March as usual, and again, finishing before Memorial Day. You can see the balance of those quarters and semesters in there as well. If we did move forward with this proposed calendar, as you can see mathematically, it is an additional 2 days over the winter break from our normal Friday to Friday piece. I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Redner to share the following 2 years.
All right, when we look at the years 23, 24, we revert back to starting school on a Monday, ending for winter holiday on that Friday, going through and balancing the quarters as well as the semesters. You can see what that looks like. Teachers would be starting school the last day in July. The one thing I want to bring to your attention is that our parent-teacher conferences in the spring would butt up next to that observed holiday in the springtime. This does preserve our holidays and breaks that we have traditionally celebrated. And then for 24, 25, again, we would be starting the first week in August, so teachers would be starting the last day in July. It balances those semesters and quarters, so you can see those numbers as well. The one thing I want to point out about this calendar is a traditionally celebrated holiday in the fall is the Thursday before fall break. And that's how the holiday turns out, so we want to bring that to your attention. So with that, those are the 4 years, those are the recommendations from the committee to bring forward. And I'd like to, again, thank everyone who spent time on this. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for questions and your feedback.
Board Member Beckman.
Ms. Redner, Mr. Fountain, thank you for your calendar presentation. I understand how much work goes into creating our calendar. It is always a conversation, let's just leave it at that, every single time we create them. I appreciate all the hours the committee has put into creating this draft. However, this is going to make me a little bit unpopular. I would like to make a motion to move the calendar to be an action item for our next meeting. Our community has not had a chance to see this calendar draft and potentially email or contact leadership with any thoughts or concerns. I myself have a concern about the release for winter break next year with finals. I'd like to see the finals Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the 15th, 16th, and 17th, and I'd like to see students return the week of January 3rd. Returning the second week is unusual and can create a hardship for many of our working families. So again, I'd like to table it just till our next meeting and bring it back for action then.
Board Member Beckman has moved to table the approval of these calendars until our next available meeting. Is there a second to that motion? And for the record, there will be a discussion period after.
Second.
Board Member Hartwell's seconds. Is there any discussion? Board Member Lindsay.
So Dr. Menzel and I have talked about the calendar. So we push all 4 years off to the next meeting. What happens potentially with this calendar? And that's something you and I had discussed. So say the community comes back and it's just the winter break, which seems to be the sticking point that you and I have discussed. Is that something that we could fix for next year and then delay the other 3 years? I've just been hearing from parents at the elementary level that they've already been making plans for next year and they're basing them off this year's calendar because we don't have a calendar. So I don't know if we can fix this coming year and then work on the other ones, or if it's just better to.
I think there are two ways to approach it, and I would ask for some guidance in terms of what work needs to be done between now and our next meeting. And I still think that our next meeting is likely on Monday, the 25th. That's the goal for our building-based metric conversation, and so we could add this to that agenda as well. I do recognize a sense of urgency around the calendar, given that people are doing their planning. It would be helpful to know having a multi-year calendar does a lot of things for a lot of people in terms of advanced planning. If the sense is that it's really fixing that winter break timeline, which is off those first 2 years from what's conventional, that's a pretty small fix. If there are other concerns in the calendar that would require more time, we'd like to know what those are so that we can take the proper next steps.
I shared the same concerns as Board Member Beckman about the winter calendar. So did they already look into that, what it would possibly look like if we moved?
I think they have, yes.
We could definitely,
What would it look like? Would the start time for the school year be the same?
okay.
So what are the moving parts there?
So the start time of the school year would remain the same, and we would take the days from the winter break, and then that would make the end of the year. We would be able to back the end of the year, which puts us farther before Memorial Day, which was definitely a talking point for many people.
So then the students would go back on the 3rd or the 5th? Because if we just slide it over, then they'd go
Right.
back on the 5th.
So that, they would go back on the 3rd.
Okay.
Would be the January date.
Okay.
The only interesting piece, I mean, for the most part, it's as simple as shifting 3 days from semester 1 to semester 2. It does throw off that balance between semesters a little bit. That was a strong talking point with the committee, particularly at the secondary level, and particularly as it relates to semester-long courses. So we run into an issue there of, if you're teaching, let's say, a one-semester AP course, you might have 8 more days to teach this group of kids than you did that group of kids. So that was one of the considerations. We typically have a little bit heavier weight second semester because we allow for testing and assessment. State assessments eat up a couple of those days, so that balances out a little bit. The one caveat with the next year's calendar, the 21-22 calendar, would be you also have to look at the 3 days on the back end then. So it's going to adjust that final week of school and where final exams fall, potentially being final exams being Friday, then Monday, Tuesday, because we would finish on a Wednesday if you move all those days back. So it makes the end of the year a little bit different as well.
So could we post both options with the winter break and see what the community thinks about that for the next meeting? Just so they see it, like a visual, like if we slide that winter break over?
Well, we could do that, similar to what Dr. Fountain did with Thought Exchange and the committee, to kind of weigh the two options and kind of that were in front of the committee beforehand. So we could use the tools that we have to gather more input.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Dr. Menzel, do you, and I guess to our guests, does the administration feel that it has enough information about what actions need to be taken? It would appear that action 1 would be to move over winter break to be more aligned with other districts than our own by shifting it over a week. And then the other step seems to be getting public feedback from our community members. And that includes our stakeholders internally, teachers and staff. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, I mean, for me, we've always, my memory serves me that we would have it as a discussion item and then it became an action item typically. And this time I know we have been challenged with time constraints, and so here it is as an action item. It's not that I anticipated our entire community to give us feedback and create this cumbersome process. It was just they've had no time to digest it whatsoever. And typically as a board member, we would present something, and you can ferret out pretty quickly when you have the majority of the community emailing you about one particular issue. So it's not that I necessarily wanted to throw up different versions and say, you know, which of these do you like? It's that I would like to have this board come up with any maybe changes that they necessarily feel strongly about and say, this is kind of what we're looking at as a draft at the next meeting, and then see how it's received by our community, you know, which I think would be, the most streamlined way to do it.
Dr. Menzel, do you feel that the direction given to you has been adequate?
I think the direction is fine. The question becomes whether or not we feel there's adequate time between now and a potential special meeting on Monday, or if we need the time and put this on the February 2nd agenda.
Well, that's totally up to how long you want it out there for the public to react to it. We could have it out on Thought Exchange tomorrow.
It's a little less than a week, so, I mean, I think that we gathered themes through the initial Thought Exchange, you know, and I think that the shifts that you're recommending honor some of those same themes, so I don't think that that's too outlandish. So it wouldn't be too hard to get that out there. And I think we had about, if I remember correctly, about 350 participants in the first round of thought exchange that spoke to the themes that they wanted that we mentioned tonight, which were, honoring those existing breaks and holidays that we're used to having. So I think we could have a supplementary piece, but I wouldn't think we'd have a lot of time to gather significant input. And I don't know that it would need, depending on your guidance, it would need to go back to the committee because it's really just a shift in the mathematics of where those days lie. So.
Yep. If I could jump in, I'm really confident that we could get significant input before next Monday with Thought Exchange.
Yeah.
It's such a great tool to use, and I know the team could get started on it right away.
Is there any further debate, discussion, questions? It is moved and seconded that the board table action item 10A, approval of school calendars, until our next meeting. All those in favor say aye?
Aye.
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 All those opposed, well, the motion carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. The board will now move to action item 10B, resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of school improvement bonds of the district. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. Again, we have Shannon coming forward to do a quick overview. As you know, we did our 2x2x1 meetings to kind of dive into the details because there are a lot of details related to a bond sale. The information presented tonight is related to the proposed final bond sale related to the 2016 bond issue approved by voters. And I just want to say before I turn it over that Scottsdale Unified School District is incredibly fortunate to have such a supportive community to invest in our schools the way they have through this bond issue. And so for me, it's pretty exciting to see all of the things that have been done so far and what's on the horizon. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you. Board President Greenberg, members of the board, Dr. Menzel, and guests. We have a couple of guests with us here tonight if there's questions and that have been helping us along this process. We have from Piper Sanford, Megan Burke, and Bill Davis. They are financial advisors when it comes to the sale of the bond. And then we have Jim Gill, who is with Gus Rosenfeld, who put together all the legal documents and make sure that we're in compliance with what we're doing for the sale. So with that, if we have questions with that, they can help with any questions there. As mentioned, in 2016, our voters approved a bond totaling $229 million. There was 3 different categories within that bond, had to do with rebuilds, remodels, school safety, and pupil transportation. We've sold, most of the bonds were down to the remaining authorization, which is just shy of $74 million. So this would be the last of the sale from that authorization from the bond 2016 approval. Right now is a really good time to be selling bonds, and so the estimated interest rate is approximately 2%. Hopefully it'll maybe even come in a little bit less, but we're estimating about 2% at this point. We looked at, when we were looking at this bond sale, we looked at the pamphlet to see how this sale would affect our tax rate and what we provided to the voters as approximate tax rates. And I'm happy to say that we're staying underneath what we had originally projected on that pamphlet. So that's really good to know as well, that because of our home values, assessed valuation, we've been able to keep the tax rate on the bonds lower than what we originally projected. We are looking at a closing of the last week in February on this. We did ratings calls 2 weeks ago now. And so we'll have those ratings to us later this week. And then once it's all done, and we've done this with prior sales, we'll present to the board a post-pricing summary so you'll know how those bonds fared, the interest rates, the coupon, and the major investors in that sale. Looking at what we anticipate using that approximately $74 million for, we're getting ready. We've already started with looking at the Kiva rebuild, so part of that money will go to the Kiva rebuild, possibly a second school rebuild or remodel, Tavon remodeling, Desert Mountain High School track, a Saguaro High School tennis court replacement, various life projects that we're still working on, and then there's still a portion of it that's left over for buses or people transportation. Those are just a couple of the big projected projects for the rest of those funds. And I will say, when we look at this too, we're selling a larger amount, but we're going through those. We're getting these projects done, and so we're getting through those things. Part of the reason we're here asking for this now versus we originally thought we'd be doing it a little bit later in the year is that we've really been able to, with the schools closed last spring, and some of the things, we've been able to ramp up our projects. And honestly, getting those projects done means that what we voted for back in 2016, their kids are getting the use of that money now versus expanding it for years and years and money sitting in a bank just collecting. We're using it. This just kind of looks at the project summary. We send this every month to the board, but this is as of just on Saturday where we were at. The bond pamphlet was basically renovate, improve, and construct school facilities. That was set at $219,910,000. School safety was just over $3 million, and people transportation at $6 million. With looking at where we are, what we've spent, you can see right now with encumbrances and expenditures, we're down to $2 million in cash, which is why we're here tonight asking for the authorization to sell those bonds so that we can move forward with future projects. There were some questions that had to do with more detail on how we're spending that and making sure that we're being very transparent in our bond expenditures. Dennis and his team, they have this program called Smart Sheets. They've worked on other tools. And so we've been balancing those numbers out, and that is information that can be put onto the website, and it gives far more detail. When we're looking at it from a finance perspective, I'm looking at it, are we meeting what the pamphlet objectives say? Dennis's detail, it breaks it down more into how much was for remodels and how much was for life cycle or life projects and more detail. But we do have that information, more detail. And like I said, I think he's about ready to actually get that posted on our website so that you can really drill down and see down to the purchase order, the exact description. So with that, do we have questions about the bond sale?
Do any board members have any questions about the bond sale? Board Member Beckman.
I'm on tonight, I guess. Thank you for that. I know I had a lot of questions for you. And Dennis, the only thing I would say is you created too much of a great thing a couple years ago when you presented your dashboard and went through the detail. So of course, I really like to see that. So Shannon, thank you for your analysis and your kind of your detailed sheets that you give us monthly, but I would like to see a reconciliation at some point showing exactly where we are, where we started, what we spent it on for the categories, and where we are now with this money and how we're going to finish up.
Yes. So. And I think we have pretty much have that ready to go. There's just so much detail that goes into that. And then I know Dennis and his team not only have worked on that, but another project where it actually has pictures and it's kind of interactive that you can go into. So we are very close, I think, Dennis, to having that ready to go for the community and anybody be able to see from our website. And like I said, it's broken down by school, project or learning communities, the exact projects, pictures, far more detail than what we have here.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? The chair moves to approve action item 10B, resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of school improvement bonds of the district. Is there a second? Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 10B, resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of school improvement bonds of the district. Is there any further debate? All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to action item 10D, approval of delegation of authority to accept service of process on behalf of the governing board. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. Previously, Michelle Marshall was given the authority to accept service of process on behalf of the governing board, and as you know, she is leaving the district for perceived greener pastures. Time will tell. But in the interim, we thought it was appropriate for the governing board to designate someone to accept service. And we propose that Gladys be the person to do that until we have a permanent in-house counsel.
Are there any board member questions or comments? All right, the chair moves to approve action item 10D, approval of delegation of authority to accept service of process on behalf of the governing board. Is there a second?
Second.
Board member Beckman seconds. Is there any further debate? It is moved and seconded that the board approve action item 10D, approval of delegation of authority to accept service of process on behalf of the governing board. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 11, future items for consideration. Do any board members have any items for future consideration? Board member Hart-Wells.
I would like in the very near future if we could have a discussion and a presentation on those efforts and ideas that are, I'm sure, underway, the learning acceleration efforts to deal with the learning loss or COVID slide, so named, as soon as possible, as practical, as soon as practical. Thank you.
I believe, to respond to that, that it is Dr. Menzel's and the administration's intent to actually present that in February.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Vice President Stanowski?
Yes, I have 2 items that I would like placed on, if possible, the next agenda or as soon as possible. And these both support the SUSD leadership team's teaching and learning priorities to develop strategies to recruit and retain high-quality employees. The first I'd like to place on our agenda would be to support the SUSD leadership priorities of teaching and learning, support recruiting and retaining quality employees. This measure includes the creation of an H policy, recognizing the importance of administrative, certified, and classified. That would be your SAA, SEA, and SSPA, employee representative voices, viewed as collaborative district partners, reinitiating the meet and confer process, and through collaboration to meet and complete an employment agreement would be an initial first step toward their future success as a unified teaching and learning community. Can I present my second?
You may.
The other item I would like to propose is for us to analyze and devise differential compensation plans for our substitute teachers in SUSD. Our current rate is near $110 a day. We have substitute teachers who have been dedicated to serving our community as substitutes for nearly 15 years, and they're making $115 a day. During our current scope of instruction delivery, they're making half of that because they get compensated for half a day. If you look at what our daily expenditures for teachers covering for one another during their planning period, which is very precious, it equals out to $197 a day that we are spending internally for substitute costs. I would like for us to re-examine the benefit that we are putting towards supporting our substitute teachers. And in order to retain qualified permanent subs across our district and have as readily available as we need committed substitutes, I would like for us to make this a priority as well.
Thank you. Are there any other items that board members would like us to consider? Board member Lindsay?
Streamlining our board meetings to improve the processes, make it more efficient, and mirror our neighboring districts.
Are there any other future items for consideration? Thank you very much. The board will now move to agenda item 12, dates of upcoming meetings. Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021 at 5 p.m., special governing board meeting at the MDA. Tuesday, February 16th, 2021 at 5 p.m., regular governing board meeting at the MDA, though there may be additional meetings that we add to the agenda per our discussion tonight. The board will now move to agenda item 13, governing board reports. Do any board members have any governing board reports? Vice President Sinowski. Vice President Sinowski, you are muted.
Sorry. I wasn't going to do that in 2021. I have had the privilege of going out and seeing on our campuses all the great work that's being expended on to give our students a great learning experience, whether it's on campus or virtually. And I've seen teachers working 3 different distinct technology formats at the same time in order to meet students' needs. It's been amazing. Cheyenne, Anasazi, Sequoia, Desert Canyon Elementary School, and I also wanted to comment on the MLK Student Voices. That was amazing, and congratulations to Dr. Menzel for his award. Much deserved. I look forward to him putting his ideas more into action once we get past COVID. And then our Saguaro Math and Science Academy, I had the privilege of joining in a town hall there, so it was very interesting to see what a great group of community supporters really lead the charge in that program. So great stuff going out there in Scottsdale schools.
Thank you. Are there any other board member reports? Board Member Beckman?
Like Board Member Sinowski, I want to applaud the Voices program that Saguaro does so wonderfully every year in conveying that message about diversity in our community. I too joined in the MSA program or the town hall, and it was fantastic. But I also had the privilege with Dr. Menzel of joining a Zoom call with newly elected Mayor Ortega of Scottsdale recently. And through that call, I think we have a renewed commitment to supporting our school district, and gave him some innovative and creative ideas in which he can help our students and programs that we're currently implementing. So I look forward to that continued partnership and growing it.
Thank you. Are there any other board member reports at this time? This concludes the board's agenda. The chair moves to adjourn this January 19th, 2021 general meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board at 8:10 p.m. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board adjourn this January 19th, 2021 regular meeting. All those in favor say aye.
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 The motion carries 5-0. The meeting is adjourned.